IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Wednesday, March 13th. I got a lot of topics we're going to talk about today. Going to dive into some spring breakout conversation. I'm going to talk about why Notre Dame fans should be excited about the Notre Dame wide receiving corps and why talking about issues from the past doesn't really have any relevance to this group today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about I listened to about an hour and 20 of the hour and 30 minutes of the congressional testimony yesterday from Nick Saban and the AD at Alabama, the commissioner of the ACC, a lawyer that does NIL, a collective guy. It was a lot of stuff, a lot of people talking. I'm going to give some thoughts on that, share some different ideas, and just kind of dive into what my takeaways were and I'll push back a little bit on some of the Saban stuff that people are going off about that just completely misses the mark. It is so obvious to see the people that are responding to what is being said about what he said and not actually responses based on what he said from people who actually listen to it, which is becoming so common nowadays. I actually had an article out yesterday that I thought it a very intriguing title. And to see some of the vitriol that people had towards the article because they assumed the article was about one thing, didn't actually read the article. But you know, it's interesting. It's very interesting. So you're seeing a lot of that. So I'll dive into that a little bit as well. Just a heads up, no mailbag today. We are not going to be doing as many daily mailbags during this spring period. We might get back to a little bit during the summer. Just depends. There's reasons why. If any of you have questions or concerns about why, you're more than welcome to shoot me an email. Brian at irishbreakdown.com. You can shoot me a DM on Twitter, or if you're on the message board, you can shoot me a message on the board. Or if you just want to flat out ask me on the board, I will explain it on the board as well. But there's a reason why we're going to not be doing as many mailbags with the shows moving forward. So gonna be very interesting to see some of those questions, but I understand some people don't like that. Totally understand, but there's a reason for it. And if you really want to know it, feel free to reach out to me and I'll explain it to you. A lot of stuff going on at IB as well. Obviously, the women's basketball team is going to be starting their ACC tournament here in the next few days. The men's team had a big win last night, so lots to be discussing about those topics on the IB Nation Sports Talk and, of course, on the message board. So tons of stuff going on. Today's show is I'm looking forward to today's show. It's going to be a lot of fun. I always enjoy the breakouts conversation. I will respond to super chats that are there. If you have a question that you really want me to address, then throw in a super chat. Otherwise, it's going to be a no mailbag day today. And then also just to give you guys a heads up, just family stuff going on. I have to have the dogs with me today. You can kind of see Rita laying down right there. If there's a chance, if Sadie sees a squirrel in the backyard, that she's going to start barking. I apologize in advance if that happens, but I may have to mute myself for a second if that happens. But I was supposed to have a co-host today, but I don't have a co-host now today. So you all are stuck with me as we dive into today's topic. So before we do me a favor, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And as always, if you haven't done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And Joe, just so you know, it's not Ryan. I was supposed to do a show with Sean today, and I was giving Ryan the day off from it. But Sean had something come up last second that was very important that he needed to deal with. And so that's why I'm doing the show solo today, but we'll make it thanks Shaquille Oatmeal. I appreciate that. We'll make it we'll make the most of it today, and I think it's gonna be a fun show. So we'll have some fun. Yeah. Thanks for that, Joe. All right, let's dive into topic number one today, folks. And in topic number one, I'm going to break it into two sections. I'm going to talk about breakout players for the spring. And that's why my gap closer shirt on today. So, we talk a lot about gap closers from a recruiting standpoint and, guys that sign with Notre Dame that we've evaluated and we project to be gap closers for Notre Dame. and kind of who we expect them to be and the kind of players they are, and they're closing the gap, closing the gap, closing the gap. But at the end of the day, you really only close the gap if those guys perform to a certain level when they get to college. And so you kind of have guys kind of come in, they all kind of go through different stages, right? Joe Alt kind of steps up right away. Benjamin Morrison steps up right away. Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, all guys that made an immediate impact. Then there's other players that really don't step up till much later in their careers. I mean, you look at a guy like Miles Boykin has what, I think 13, 18 career catches through his first 3 years. Javon McKinley has like, I think less than like 12, 11, 12 his first 4 years. And then they later in their careers, they break out and have a great last seasons. And then there's guys that are sophomore breakouts and junior breakouts, and they happen at all these different types. And those guys, to me, it's like those guys stepping up are what truly closes the gap for your football team. So there's the recruiting type of gap closers, but then there's the guys that, hey, who steps up to help replace Joe Alt? Who steps up to replace Audric Estime? Who steps up at receiver to give them the breakout player? Who's the pass rusher that steps up? Who's the linebackers that step up? So those guys kind of having those breakouts is going to be a big part of a team's success. And when you look at examples for Notre Dame in recent years, you had Audric Estime, who I think had 7 carries as a freshman, breaks out and rushes for over 900 yards in year 2. That's a breakout year. And then I would also argue that Audric had a second breakout this past season where he went from being a good player that really helped the Notre Dame offense to a national player. So breakouts can be a lot of different things. Sometimes breakouts can be, hey, I didn't play a whole lot in my first year. Now I'm playing a lot and I'm a very important player. Other times it's about, hey, I was a good player. Now I'm a great player. Other guys are pretty good players and now become stars. And so like a guy that can't break out, Xavier Watts can't break out. He's already had that, right? There's a lot of, there's certain guys. Joe Alt couldn't break out in 2023, right? He had already kind of had that breakout moment. And, but not every breakout is a guy that's a star. So there's all types of ways. So I'm going to dive into the different players that I see as spring breakouts. But the thing that I noticed is this year's breakouts, as I put this list together for both sides of the ball, there are a lot of these breakouts are guys that I do think have a chance to become stars. Not all, but some of them really do have a chance to become stars. And so it's going to be a very interesting conversation that I'm looking forward to having with you guys about the breakouts. And we'll begin with the offense, and then part 2 of today's show. If you're listening via podcast, it'll be a different podcast, but obviously part of this show, it'll be just part 2 of this show. We'll dive into the defense, the defensive breakouts for Notre Dame. Before we move on, I have to address something from my guy Sly. Just to make sure that you and I are clear. All right. So Sly, just so you know, because I want to make sure it's clear to Sly and Archer, talking about the Ryan Day beard, this color is natural. Okay. I'm not a grown man that dyes my beard or my hair. See, so you can see the gray coming in a little bit up here. You can see the gray here. So I do not do the Ryan Day fake beard color thing. Just so you guys know, I'm not going to have any black dripping down my neck if I start sweating during today's show. So just want to make sure it's all natural here in the Driscoll household. Just want to make sure you guys are aware of that when you compare my beard to Ryan Day's. Mine is natural, my friend. Very natural. So let's dive into some breakouts for today's show. And I'm going to begin with the offense. And I'm going to kind of go somewhat positionally for these and have a little bit of fun with it. And I'm curious to hear, from those in the chat. I want to hear who your breakouts are. So I want to know who your breakouts are, but then also what your thoughts are on my breakouts. And so sometimes it's one guy, sometimes it's a couple. But I've got 2 breakouts that I'm going to start off with because I think their breakout is not this guy breaks out and this guy breaks out. It's more about this duo is going to break out and step into that role. And as I go through these, I'll tell you guys what kind of breakout I'm expecting from them, so you understand what I'm looking for here. My first breakout has to start at running back. And you could go with Jeremiah Love. You could go with Jadarian Price. There's a lot of different ways you can go with this. But I'm going with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price as a duo. I'm going with those 2 guys as a breakout together in similar fashion to what we saw 2 years ago with Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. And when I look at those two guys, I could see a scenario where Jeremiah or Jadarian become like the number one guy, but I think it's really going to be a 1A, 1B situation for Notre Dame. Somebody's going to lead the team in rushing. It may be Jeremiah, it may be Jadarian. Jeremiah may get 65% of the snaps and of the starter snaps, and Jadarian may get 30 or 35. It may be 50-50. It may be 60. I don't know what the snap count is going to be. That's not really what I care about. I'm looking at these guys as impact breakout players. And look, Audric Estime was a stud for Notre Dame last year. A stud. He's going to be missed. There's no question about it. 1,341 yards, 18 rushing touchdowns, another 17 catches, and about 125 or so receiving yards for him last year. Great production. Over 1,400 yards of total offense. Leader, tough player, stepped up in big moments. And so replacing a guy like him won't be easy. And when you look at the top two backs for last year, which was Audric and Jeremiah, those top two backs last year, the production was outstanding. I mean, you're talking about 1,341 yards for Audric. You're talking about 385 yards for Jadarian or for Jeremiah, which gives their 1-2 punch 1,726 yards, which is about what they had the year before as a 1-2 punch, just rushing the year before. Audric and Logan Diggs in 13 games combined for 1,742 yards. So there's that level of really big-time production that we've seen that we haven't seen in past years when they've had a stud running back. You know, Kyron Williams in 2021, the top two backs that season only rushed for about 1,235 yards. 2019, the top two backs only rushed for a little over 1,000 yards. So the production we've seen at running back the last 2 years from a rushing standpoint has been really outstanding. And it's not something that Notre Dame has seen from a duo in several years. The closest they got was 2020 with Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree, who rushed for a little over 1,600 yards in 12 games. That was a pretty good group and pretty good production, but that duo did not have as many touchdowns as just Audric had last year. And so when I look at this duo, I think they have a chance to be a duo that's online with what Audric and Jeremiah produced last year and what Audric and Logan had the year before, and maybe even a chance for more. And I definitely predict that they're going to have more overall yards. But that's the fall. What is it going to be about the spring that is going to make them spring breakouts? And this is really what it comes down to. If they're going to have that fall breakout, the roles are going to start to be established now, in my opinion. So this is an important period for Notre Dame because this is establishing the foundation of what your team is going to be. For Mike Denbrock, it's evaluating who are my playmakers, who are my solid, steady guys, who are my clutch guys, who are my rotation guys, who are the guys that just aren't there yet. You know, you're evaluating your entire roster, and you have certain opinions based on film and high school film and film of Notre Dame last year and winter workouts. But this is really when things start to separate. And what you see this spring is going to go a long way towards determining what Mike Denbrock thinks his offense is going to look like going into the fall. And so I think what is going to happen is, Mike Denbrock's going to go into the season probably like he has been a lot of years, 11 personnel. We're going to run this type of scheme. We're going to do this type of plays. But I believe the way it's going to go is that as Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price have breakouts this spring, you're going to get into a situation where Mike Denbrock's going to say, hey, I have some tools. I have some unique tools that I haven't really had at past stops. And Mike Denbrock's base philosophy has always been 11 personnel as the primary personnel group that he uses. That was true at Notre Dame. That was true for first couple years at Cincinnati. It was true for the 2021 season at Cincinnati to a degree, and it was certainly true the last 2 years at LSU. But there was a season in 2020 and 2021 even to a degree at Cincinnati where Mike Denbrock went away from what had normally been who he was as a coach as far as how he uses personnel. And the reason why, he had two really good tight ends in Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley. So Mike Denbrock's a coach who, this is my philosophy, but if my personnel dictates something different, then I'm going to lean into that. And I think we're going to see that at running back this spring. And I think that you're going to see him say, hey, this Jadarian Price kid is really good, natural runner, inside zone galore. He can run the buck sweeps. He can run counter. He can run outside zone. He can take a toss. He can do a lot of different things. Really good downhill runner and home run speed. And then I've got this Jeremiah Love kid who can run all those same runs in different ways. But this is a kid that also can not only be effective with pass game out of the backfield. This is the kid that I can line up outside and do some different things with: jet motions, reverses, screens, downfield pass concepts, and say, hey, look, maybe I need to lean into this. And so part of my breakout prediction with this duo is I think what we're going to see from this duo is they're going to force Mike Denbrock to say, hey, we're going to have to adapt a little bit personnel-wise, scheme-wise to fit this group. I like my tight ends. I like my receivers. I like my mobile quarterback. But this 1-2 punch at running back is something special, and I got to lean into it a little bit. I think we're going to see that from this duo, and I think they're both going to have breakouts. I think Jeremiah is going to be just a nonstop home run player that we're going to see this spring, run game, pass game. I don't know how much that they're going to show us. I think Jeremiah is going to thrive in the run game that Mike Denbrock wants to bring to the table. Inside zone, some duo, counter, outside zone. Those are all things to me that are just right up Jadarian Price's wheelhouse as far as where he's a great runner. So that's where my breakout begins. And I think what that also is going to do is, if they break out like I predict, and I think that they will, you're going to see that also have an impact on how they utilize Riley Leonard, because you can do a lot less of the designed runs with Riley Leonard if you have the faith in these two players. And what I mean by that is, like, Riley Leonard can run quarterback power. He can run quarterback counter. You can run quarterback sweeps. You can do a lot of different things where you're designing him to be the primary ball carrier. The other things he can do is be a complementary weapon where, yes, I'm going to scramble, but within the run game, I'm doing a lot of read zone. I'm doing different types of stuff where, you're playing to the running back, but he can then pull and hurt you if you do certain things. The concern, obviously, that some people have is, can Riley Leonard hold up that way? Well, if you have running, and when you look at LSU last year, it kind of plays into it. So last year at LSU, they needed Jaden Daniels to be a big part of the run game for their run game to really thrive. If you look at LSU's production last year, I mean, they were a really good running team from a number standpoint. LSU last year ranked 11th in the country in rushing at 204.5 yards per game, and they led the nation with 6.2 yards per carry. Well, a lot of that, I shouldn't say a lot, a chunk of that was due to the ability of Jaden Daniels to scramble. And a lot of his production was from that. And when you look at, for example, the rushing from last season, according to Pro Football Focus, if you look at the different type of results that they had him down for 529 designed rushing yards. They had 721 of those being scramble yards. Seems about accurate to me, based on breaking down the film. But still, 500 some yards from your quarterback is a lot of production. And they needed a lot of those scramble yards because of the way that their defense played. He had to go out and kind of play Superman ball. I don't know that Riley Leonard is going to need to play Superman ball that way. But if you have a dynamic backfield, which LSU didn't have, Logan Diggs was their best running back last year, but he was hurt for part of the year. He started the year off banged up. Finished the year off banged up, only played 10 games in between, wasn't always 100% healthy in between those games. The last two games that he played in, he had 5 carries in one game and 1 in another after having missed 2 games. He only had 5 games last year. We had 10 or more carries because he was banged up a lot. He just wasn't healthy. And so you needed Jaden Daniels to carry that load. And Riley Leonard's more than capable of doing that. He did that to a degree at Duke during his tenure there. And so, when you look at the potential of this breakout happening, if I'm right and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price break out this spring, then what you're going to see is this Notre Dame football team say, hey, with Riley Leonard, he's going to do his thing on scrambles, But the big thing is we're going to need him to really step up and be more of a factor in less of a factor in the design runs and step up more as a passer. And then what that'll do is you'll see his scramble yards ramp up a little bit, and maybe some of his designed run yards go down. If you look at his numbers in 2022, for example, he had 441 yards rushing on designed runs. I think, what did I say? Uh, Jaden Daniels had like 529. Jaden Daniels had over 700 scramble yards. Riley Leonard had 335. And so that's a when you break it down, that's obviously more rushing yards, less scramble yards. I could see a scenario where if these two guys step up, that Riley's production becomes more about scramble yards than it does yards on design runs. And the reason that matters is scramble yards tend to come with less physical punishment that you take. Same with if you're being used on. I'm the read zone guy. I'm reading and I'm pulling and I'm getting out the back door. Those type of runs take a lot less. There's a lot less punishment on the quarterback in those situations. And that's where I think that this breakout could happen. And if they don't break out, then you're going to have to go into the season with saying, hey, these are good players, but we're really going to need Riley Leonard to be more of a factor in the run game, designed run game, if we're going to get to where we want to get to as a team. Breakout number 2 is a wide receiver. And I've been back and forth a little bit on this one for a while. And I know the popular names. I mean, Jordan Faison and Chris Mitchell and Deion Colsey, Bo Collins when he gets here in the fall. We've had those conversations, and I know that the guy that I'm going to go with is a guy that certain people are going to go with as well. But I just have a feeling, and maybe it's wishful thinking more than it is a true prediction. But I have a feeling that Jaden Greathouse is going to be a breakout player for Notre Dame this year. I do. I won't be shocked at all if by the end of the spring we're excited about what Chris Mitchell does, and we're excited about what Jordan Faison can do, and Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey and Jaden Harrison and KK Smith, and I mean just Cam Williams, Micah. I mean, there's so many guys to be excited about. But the guy that I really Ryan and I talked about this, I fully anticipate the potential for Jaden Thomas to lead the team in catches next year. I fully expect Jaden Thomas to be that guy. That's not a breakout, though, for me. That's Jaden Thomas being what we already know of Jaden Thomas, but just staying healthy. That's really all Jaden Thomas has to do. He doesn't have to get necessarily better, although there's parts of his game I want to see improve. But it's more about, dude, just stay on the field. If you stay on the field, you're guaranteed like 4 or 5 catches a game. Jaden Greathouse, to me, is a guy that has a chance to break out and become that go-to player when things matter most. I think Jaden has a chance to be a volume guy. I think Jaden has a chance to be a down-the-field guy in certain looks. And what we started to see late last year that I think benefited him a little bit was the opportunity to move around a little bit more. He's not a guy you just want to plug in the slot and say, go be the slot. He's not a guy you want to plug in the boundary and say, go be the boundary. He can thrive in the slot. He can handle that role, no problem. But it's more about you're not using all of his skills. He's not a boundary guy as a true freshman. But what I think would be smart for them to do is to say, hey, Jaden, you've got to be prepared to play all over. You're our all-over guy because he's such a smart player. He has a great feel for the game. He's a better athlete than people give him credit for. There's just a lot of things about Jaden that make me think he's going to go from, 18 catches last year to 40 plus this year. And I think you're going to start to see that this spring. We kind of saw it the other day. One of the things with Jaden, like with all young players, it's about, your first year is about growing up as a young person and growing up as a player and dealing with some adversity that you've never really had to deal with in the past. And for Jaden, it's about, make the right decisions about who you're hanging out with, make the right decision about what food you're putting in your body, make the right decision about, building my time from, class and workouts and practice, and all those things are a big part of your freshman year. And that's true for a lot of players. But then the second year is, okay, I found my comfort zones. I found my balances. Now it's about building. Now it's about growing my game. And when I look at Jaden Greathouse, I see a guy that really just has the best all-around game at the receiving core. I just think he does. Maybe that changes in 2 years when Cam Williams has some more experience. But when I look at this 2024 team, I think he has the best all-around game and can hurt teams the most in more different ways. And his ability to catch the ball and get open is really outstanding. And so he's the guy that I think by the end of spring is going to step up and be that impact player for Notre Dame. Now, unlike running back, Jaden not stepping up doesn't have the same damaging side effects that the running back stepping up. If Jeremiah and Jadarian don't step up, both of them, that hurts the offense quite a bit. If only one of them steps up and one of them's just solid, they'll be okay. It just won't be quite as dynamic, but you're going to have to, use Riley a little bit more, unless it's another running back that steps up as that number 2. If Jaden doesn't step up, it really doesn't kill the offense at all. It doesn't, because unlike this group, there are so many other options, and that's something I'm going to dive into here a little bit as we get into the receiving core conversation. It's a little bit of a preface to that, but I just have a feeling watching him run around the other day, he looked quick, he looked in shape, he looked like there's some body transitioning going on as he goes into year 2. He understands how to get open against zone. He's a good route runner. He can run. He can get free versus man. Now he's a year stronger. And that's something you started to see a little bit this spring too. In that one practice we saw is he's a little bit thicker up here. His arms are a little bit more defined, which are traits that should allow him to better handle the outside and allow him to thrive in that regard. So that's why Jaden Greathouse is my breakout player number 2 for the Notre Dame offense. Let's go to breakout number 3 and 4. And I'm going to kind of talk about them together because they're both offensive linemen. So I'm going to talk about one and then lead right into the second one. But my next 2 guys are breakouts are on the offensive line. And I'll be honest, these breakouts are let's be honest, are as much about need as actual predicting. Now, the predicting part is there. I do think that we're going to see that, but it's also needs. These are musts. And the first one is Charles Jagasaw. It's enough pressure to come into Notre Dame as a 5-star player. I mean, that's enough pressure by itself. It's a whole different animal when you're stepping into Notre Dame as a 5-star player and you're replacing a first-round draft pick. I mean, a guy that was a 2-time All-American. Last year was a unanimous All-American. You're talking about a guy that was about as steady as they come, as dependable as they come, who's about to go be a top 10 draft pick. I mean, that's big expectations for any player. And then you throw in the personal expectations that were already there for Charles, and there's a big burden on that young man's shoulders. But I believe he's got the talent to do it. I think he's got the ability to go out and say, "Hey, look, I'm this good. I can be that kind of player." And now it's about him going out and doing it. And I got to be honest, I was surprised with how well he played in the bowl game. It was funny. He got off to, we've talked about this before, he got off to a bit of a rough start and got knocked down. I think the first play he definitely got knocked down. I think the second or third play also got third or fourth play, also got knocked down. And you're thinking this Charles Jagasaw probably hasn't been knocked down a whole lot in his career, but he really settled in. I think that was a good wake up to college football type of moment for him. And I thought he played for a true freshman, played well against, because again, Oregon State had a lot of guys missing from their defense. They had both their starting inside backers were gone. I think one or two, maybe two, at least one of their starting corners was gone. One of their two of their safeties were gone, including their best safety. There was a lot gone from the back 7, but the front was there. The edge rushers that had been part of that defense all year played in that game, and Charles handled himself very well. And the reason he handled himself very well is honestly because he's incredibly talented. And that's not to take away from the work ethic and from the technique, but there were times in that game when Charles came off and did not have a good pass set technique, or maybe got his feet in a little bit of a mess, or didn't get out of his stance quite fast enough against a pretty good edge rusher, but he still was able to do the job because he's so big and because he is so athletic. Where when you go and you look at the right side and Tosh Baker gets out of his stance slow against Jordan Patelho, and then boom, Jordan's going to beat him. If Tosh gets out of his stance poorly with other technique or whatever, he's just not explosive enough athletically to recover. He doesn't have that natural punch, that natural pop to recover. He's just going to get beat. There were times against Oregon State where Charles would actually get beat off the snap, but he's so rangy and he's so athletic for that size, and he's so long and he's so powerful that he was able to recover and still win the rep. It wasn't pretty, but he was able to win the rep. Well, now that experience is going to pay huge dividends for Charles, I believe, as long as he's going to work at it. And I have not heard a single person ever say that Charles Jagasaw working was a problem. So I don't see that being an issue. But as long as he does put in that work and is coachable, also something we've heard that he is, he's going to have a chance to be a special player. And I think we're going to start to see that this spring. Because, again, there's a when you talk about offensive linemen, there's something to be said about guys can just get away with certain things because they're just so good. And what that does is it really increases your margin for error. You can actually make a mistake and still get the job done because you're just so big or athletic or strong. And for Charles, he's kind of all those things. And so that helps him be really good. But now going into year 2, there's a lot of, hey, he's got the ability to improve his technique and learn the offense and be a more seasoned player. Because remember, this is Charles's first spring. He was not an early enrollee. Everything he did last year started in the summer. Now he went through the summer workouts. He went through fall camp. He went through the entire season and then really kind of broke out in bowl prep. And now he's a starting left tackle. Well, now that he's had winter workouts and you're heading into spring, this is when you should start to see him really kind of take off. And I think those are going to be opportunities for him to really, really thrive and be a breakout guy. Now, breakout, does that mean he's going to be as good as Joe Alt? No. He's not going to be a unanimous All-American. He's not going to be that this year. Maybe down the road he could be that guy, but he's not going to be that guy this year. But what it means is that he's going to be a really a good player, really good player on the left side. And we're going to start to see that. He's such a powerful run blocker and that's expected. But even last year as a freshman in that one game he really played, he wasn't as dominant as a run blocker as he's capable of because there was still some obvious uncertainty because it was all new to him. Well, that's not going to be the case when we get to the fall. And it's not the case now because he does have that experience under his belt. He's going to get a ton of reps at left tackle this spring. So I really believe that Charles Jagasaw has a chance to be a big-time breakout player. And it's important. I mean, they need him to be. And that's the thing. They need him to be. They need him to be a guy that is really good. They can't just have him be okay. We saw what happens when you have okay play at left tackle in 2021 before Joe Alt took over, and it was a hot mess. And, this guy played okay, that guy played okay, but just okay doesn't beat Cincinnati. Just okay, helps you beat Purdue. It helps you beat a sub-500 Florida State team. It helps you come back and beat Toledo, but it doesn't help you beat it doesn't help you beat Cincinnati. It barely helped you beat Wisconsin. If it wasn't for your special teams and defense making plays in the fourth quarter, it might not have been good enough to beat Wisconsin in 2021. So they're really going to need to step up and have really good production there. And I think Charles has a chance to be that. And as long as he can stay healthy and put in the work, I believe he's going to have a chance to be that kind of player. And so he's my breakout number 1. My breakout number 2 on the offensive line is Billy Schrauth. Heard some things about Billy over the last year about, just really needing to mature as a player. Started kind of hearing it last summer and into the fall camp where, man, you love the talent, but he's still got some growing up to do. I still feel he should have played. I mean, I think part of the growing up process is like sit down and push this young man, but then create a role, give him something to strive to. And so that obviously was important. But Billy had some issues during the fall. I mean, you'd see it when he'd get in late in games, and it was just, this isn't the guy that I thought they were getting when they signed him. Well, then he's kind of thrust into the starting lineup against Wake Forest because Rocco Spindler got hurt. And you started to see the Billy Schrauth that we thought we were going to get when he committed to Notre Dame and then ultimately signed with Notre Dame. Now, keep in mind, too, that Billy was dealing with some things his first year. He was battling an injury, missed all of the previous spring. So last spring was his first spring of actually getting work in. But when Billy stepped into the starting lineup, his play definitely got better, and it got better each game. He was okay against Wake. He was pretty good against Stanford, and I thought he was really good against Oregon State, especially in the run game. And I think he's got a chance to really be that breakout player. He's going into year 3. So this is the year that a lot of the body transformation really kicks in. You know, you've had now 2 years to kind of reshape your body. He's listed at 306. He looks a lot bigger than that. I mean, he just looks thicker than 306, but that's what he's listed as. He's a really good athlete. He's strong. He's powerful. It's just about, can you be this version of yourself every day? Can you be this version of yourself on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and also Saturday during the season? And I think the spring is an important period for that, because Billy has always shown flashes of being a really good player, but an offensive lineman can't be flashy. He needs to be consistent. Now, you want a guy that can be dominant, but you can't have an offensive lineman that's, you know, great 3 plays and then just gets whooped the other 2 plays. It's just can't have that. I'm not saying that's who Billy is. I'm making a point. There was not a level. Clearly, Joe Rudolph did not have the faith in Charles, or excuse me, not Charles, but Billy, to put him out there and expect him to do the job at a high level, snap after snap after snap. And you could say, hey, he should have played him more, should give him opportunity. And those things are all fair, but there's a reason why he didn't play him last year. And Billy, it would seem, worked through that. And now he heads into the spring with a chance to lock down that job. Look, we're all assuming that Billy's just a starter now. That's not a given. He's going to have to earn it this spring. Rocco's going to be competing. Pat Coogan's going to be competing. Sam Pendleton's not going to be like, well, the Bull starters returned. I guess I'm going to have to sit on the bench for another year. No, Sam Pendleton's going to say, hey, great job in a bowl game. Now I'm going to try and beat you out. Right? He better. That's what Sullivan Absher needs to be trying to do. That's what Ty Chan needs to be trying to do. That's what Peter Jones should be trying to do. That's what all these kids should be trying to do. It's about whether or not they can get to that point. That's going to be a big key for Billy, is not to feel like I've arrived, but to say, hey, I got my opportunity. Now it's time to go do something with it. Now it's time for me to become the player that I know I can be and that I want to be. And then earn it every single day. And I think he is. I think now that he's going to his junior year, I think we're going to see a different looking Billy Schrouth. I think we're going to see a guy that the dominance that we expected to see on a consistent basis, because the athleticism, because the power is going to be there. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think a big reason why I'm expecting Charles and Billy to break out is because of the arrival of Mike Denbrock. And not because Mike Denbrock is going to coach the offensive line. And he has. I mean, he's coached offensive line in the past, so he understands that part of the game. But it's more so about his style of play fits what they're going to do. And because you have a new coordinator, you're going to have you're not building on what you established last year. You're inserting new. And so the inside zone and all the variations of it are going to be a big part of the spring. And that's going to allow those guys to maybe be a little bit more condensed in the scheme, focus more on the technique, focus more on the style of play. Mike Denbrock's likes bullies on the offensive line. He likes guys that can push people around. He wants to get movement at the point of attack. It's a big thing for him. That fits right in with what Charles and with what Billy are all about. Last year's offensive line was partly about, that, but there was a lot of pin and pull and different things. It's not so much about bully ball. Mike Denbrock, with obviously technique's important and you've got to have some movement stuff, but it's a lot of bully ball. We're going to run inside zone and we're going to run it right down your throat all game, and we're going to run some variations, but we're going to come right at you and we're going to hammer you. I think that fits right into the wheelhouse for Charles Jagusah and Billy Schrouth. And I think those two guys have a chance to be really, really good players. I mean, you could throw Ashton Craig in there. Some people might take Emil Wagner, Tosh Baker, hopefully Pat Coogan steps up. But the reason I went with Charles and Billy is because, in my opinion, that's the 2 most talented offensive linemen on the roster. The fact that both of them got some opportunities to play meaningful snaps last year is going to be the springboard of why I think they're going to pan out. Because with all due respect to Rocco and Pat Coogan and Tosh Baker and even Ashton Craig, who I would probably put in there as the number 3 guy from a talent standpoint, all Emil Wagner, Sam Pendleton, Sullivan Absher, I think right now, 2024, those are the 2 most talented players. And I think you're going to see them really emerge as that this spring, and it's going to give Notre Dame an opportunity to be an impact player. So at the end of these breakouts, I'm going to give one position where I think someone's going to break out, but I don't know who. And that's going to be the last one that I talk about for offense, and I'll do the same for the defense. So offensively, here's a breakout that we're going to see this spring. Quarterback. And it won't be Riley Leonard. Now, what I mean by that is it's not that Riley Leonard's not going to start or play well. Riley Leonard's the starting quarterback. Riley Leonard should be the starting quarterback. Riley Leonard will be the starting quarterback as long as he doesn't get hurt. Riley Leonard is I think, has a chance to be an excellent player this year. But this spring, I think the breakout that I'm more referring to is there's going to be somebody that's going to emerge this spring at quarterback that says, hey, that's the future. He's not there yet, but that's the future. And I'm not saying who it's going to be. It could be CJ Carr. It could be Kenny Minchey. It could be Steve Angeli. I don't know who that's going to be yet. I want to see more from them. And I think all of them to some degree have that ability. If you were to have me rank, the upside of these players, that, I could get into that, and that would provide me a certain ranking, where guys are in their development. There's all types of things that you can look at. But at the end of the day, this is going to come down to somebody is going to be that guy. And a big reason why I think it's going to happen is because of the presence of the others. The presence of Steve Angeli is going to force Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr to be at their best. The presence of Kenny Minchey, of Steve Angeli and CJ Carr is going to force Kenny Minchey to be at his best. The presence of Kenny and Steve is going to force CJ to be at their best. And the presence of CJ and Kenny is going to even raise the bar for Steve Angeli. And so I've made my opinion clear over the last couple of years, of my belief in the talent of all those guys and where they are. And you guys know how much I love Kenny. You guys know how much I love CJ as a player, and that I'm not super high on Steve Angeli. But I'm not going to be completely shocked if Steve Angeli's the guy that has that breakout, because I think competition pushes players. It gets players to really, battle. You find out who the guys are that don't have that dog in them. You find that out real quick when you have this kind of competition. But what it also does is when you have great ones, it forces the great ones to really rise to the occasion. And I think Notre Dame has potential to have some great ones at quarterback. And this is one of the most talented quarterback. I mean, this is the most talented quarterback room Notre Dame has had since 2014. It really is. Just God-given ability. And if you remember that year, it was Everett Golson, Deshaun Kaiser, and Malik Zaire. Well, should we say Everett Golson, Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser were all part of that quarterback room. That was an incredibly talented quarterback room. You can go to 2015, even more so, actually, before Malik's injury and Everett left. I mean, even 2015 was talented when you had Malik, Deshaun, and Brandon Wimbush. But 2014 with Everett, to me, was an exceptional quarterback room from a talent standpoint with Everett, Malik, and Deshaun. This is the most talented room they've had since then. Now, they've got to step up and play well, but the fact that there is so much talent, to me, somebody in that room is going to look around the room and say, okay, there's a lot of good players here. I'm going to have to really bring it today, and that player is going to rise above all the others. Ideally, they all raise their game, but I predict that by the end of the spring, even if it's not declared he's QB2 or whatever the case may be, we're going to know by the end of the spring who the future is at quarterback for Notre Dame. And that's one of my predictions for the offense. So I'm going to talk about defense next, but that is my breakouts for the offense. I went running backs with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. I went Jaden Greathouse at wide receiver, Charles Jagasol, offensive line, left tackle, Billy Shrouth at left tackle, and a quarterback. And the thing that has me excited about this offense, if I'm going to be honest with you guys about this as I wrap this up, I could have gone with so many other players on this. I could have gone with Jabron Payne. I could have gone with Keedron Young. I could have gone with Chris Mitchell. I could have gone with Jordan Faison. I could have gone with Cam Williams. I could have gone with Micah Gilbert. I could have gone with Jaden Thomas. I could have gone with Deion Colsey. I could have gone with KK Smith. There's so many different directions I could have gone. I could have gone with Eli Raridan at tight end. I could have gone with Cooper Flanagan at tight end. I could have gone with Ashton Craig at center. There's so many different directions I could have gone with this that it really gets me fired up because, like I said, in the past, I'm going to save that part for the receiver conversation. But there's just so many talented players that you just feel like somebody's going to step up there, right? Like between Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Jabron Payne, uh, Keedron Young, and Aeneas Williams, two of those guys are going to step up, right? I mean, it's not logical to think that guys with that talent, coached by one of the best in the business in Dylan McCullough, in a system that has generated production at running back in the run game since it started with Mike Denbrock, that some of these guys aren't going to step up. And I feel the same way about receiver. I feel the same way about the offensive line. I mean, we have questions about the degree to how good Joe Rudolph is. And there's very fair concerns to have about, is he going to be an elite O-line coach or just a good O-line coach? But the reality is Joe Rudolph's track record is such that he's at least going to be a good O-line coach. And if he's just a good O-line coach with guys like Jagasol, Shrouth, Craig, Wagner, Baker, Pendleton, Absher, Spindler, I mean, all these types of guys, some of these guys are going to break out, right? I mean, you have to think so now that they're going into year two. And that's what gets me a little bit fired up about this group, is because there is that type of talent at Notre Dame. I really believe that to be true. I believe that this Notre Dame team has a chance to be a very, very talented team. And the more of these guys that break out, the better it's going to be. But I also think it creates a scenario where the predictions for breakouts can maybe be a bit more wrong, because there are so many potential breakout options. I'm most confident in the running back ones and the 2-0 line ones. Those are the two I'm most confident in, if I'm going to be honest. And we'll see how it goes. But before I move on to the defense, folks, do me a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And if you've not done so, I'm going to take a little 15-second break here. You could get most of the entire process of getting signed up to the message board at boards.breakdown.com done by the time we kick off part 2 of today's show. So it's kind of actually funny. I wish you guys could see this, but I look over during the break and Sadie's just staring at me. She's sitting there staring at me, shaking her backside. She doesn't know what she wants to do. She doesn't know if she wants to go lay on in the sun on the window, or if she wants to jump on me, or if she wants to go lay on the bed. It's actually kind of funny, but she's having a fun time here today in the room. So appreciate you guys bearing with me on that. Part 2 of today's show is going to talk about breakout players on defense, and not as many known quantities on this side of the ball. And it's kind of interesting because just talking about talent, the offense to me has more unestablished talent than the defense. The defense has more established talent. And when there's more established talent, there's less options for breakout. So, for example, on offense, there's literally the opportunity for a breakout at all 11 positions, because there's nobody that's established that's going to be here in the spring. I mean, you could talk about Mitchell Evans being an established player, but he's not here in the spring. He's not a guy that's practicing in the spring, and we're talking about spring breakouts. And so you could see all 5 offensive line positions are potential breakouts, quarterback, and not just younger players, but even a guy like Riley Leonard. I mean, he could be a guy that we're talking about. Holy moly, he's even better than we thought by the end of spring. Everywhere else, you're seeing that, and so it creates more opportunities for breakout. So that's why when I talk about, there's so many more opportunities for breakout guys, because there's so much need for that on that side of the ball. Defensively, there's less opportunities. You've already got an All-American cornerback. You've already got an All-American in safety. You've already got the best arguably the best returning D-tackle combo in the country, along with the 2 kids in Michigan. And then you've got, Jack Kaiser. So there's just fewer opportunities for breakouts this spring, but there's certainly some. And we're gonna focus on those guys. And I'm actually going to start off, and it's going to be sort of I'm going to go by position, and I'm going to work back forward on this one. And part of the reason for that is because I'm so certain of one of these positions. And this is probably the player that of all the breakouts, I'm probably most confident in is going to be a spring breakout player. And that's Christian Gray at cornerback. when I look at Christian Gray, I just see a kid that has all the God-given tools to be a star. And not just a good player, but a star. Now, do I expect him to be a star by sophomore year? Maybe. He's got the tools to be. There's no reason he can't be as good as Benjamin Morrison was last year. I mean, he doesn't have the experience Benjamin had in year one, but he did play as a freshman. But the talent is there. He's not as – there's some aspects of corner play he's got to learn that Benjamin had immediately, but Christian can get away with certain things because he's faster than Benjamin. And then physically they look very, very similar. So I'm not saying he's going to be better than Benjamin this year. I'm saying he has a chance to be about as good as Benjamin was last year. And so you could argue that Benjamin Morrison could be a breakout in that he goes from really, really good to the best corner in college football. That's not a breakout that's going to be established this spring. I'll talk more about that as we get to the fall. We already know Benjamin Morrison's a stud right now. But I think Christian Gray has a chance to be that guy as well. I think he fits Al Golden's system extremely well. He's a man cover guy. He's very confident, but he's also not cocky about it. And what I mean by that is, cocky guys tend to be a lot of bluster, and they don't always necessarily understand their need to continue to be better. Benjamin Morrison's a confident kid, but I think he understands the areas where he's got to get better. Christian Gray is a confident kid, but I think he understands that there's parts of his game that have to get better. And I like that about him. And of course, the physical tools are exceptional. I mean, he's 6 feet tall plus. He's got really long arms. He's fast. He's smooth. He plays the ball well, which is an important thing. He's just got all the tools to be a star. I mean, if I was getting interviewed by a national media person, they would say, what's the one player that nobody else knows about that you're most confident becomes a household name by the end of the year? I got asked this question last year on a show. I'd say Christian Gray. I mean, that'd be my pick of being that player. Now, he's got a battle this spring. Jaden Mickey is going to battle him this spring. There's no doubt about it. But I just feel like by the time we get to the end of spring, we're going to be looking at Benjamin Morrison and be like, yep, that's that dude. And then we're going to look across the other side of the field and be like, that dude, that's a dude too. And I'm just telling you guys, I've said this before, but there's times when they're both on the field together going through drills and stuff that you don't know which one is which. I mean, they look and move so similarly. And of course, one's number 20 and one's number 29. So if you're not looking directly at them, you can kind of be like, which one was that? I mean, there's just so many similarities between them two when they're in pads. And then, of course, where they play. Now, when you get out on the field, you can kind of tell the difference a little bit if you're really right there because field boundary. But, man, these two kids are very similar. They're very, very similar as players. And I know that's putting a lot on Christian, saying he might be as good as what Benjamin was as a sophomore or close to it. That's a lot to put on him. But I think he's that good. I really do. I think he's that talented. From what I've been told, he works. He puts in work. He's got a good attitude. All those things check out from what I've been told from my sources. I just think that kid's got a chance to be special. And that doesn't mean I don't have high expectations for Jaden Mickey. I think Jaden Mickey's going to be a very important part of this defense. I think Jaden Mickey's going to have a pretty good spring as well. But you're a very important part, and then you're a dude. And I think Christian Gray is going to be a dude. And that's why he's at the top of my list for breakout players. Going to go level 2 for the next two guys. And my number one is one that I think a lot of people are going to assume is going to be a potential breakout player, and that's Drake Bowen. I know he's playing baseball. From what I've talked to people about, baseball is his number 2 sport in the spring, where football is number 2 for Jordan Faison in the spring, and it should be. I have no problem with that. He came to Notre Dame as a lacrosse player. He should be loyal to the lacrosse program. The position he plays also makes it easier for a guy to play both, to be honest with you. I mean, Jordan Faison doesn't need 15 practices to become a better football player as a wide receiver. It just isn't needed the same way it is for a quarterback or a middle linebacker or a D tackle or a safety. There are some positions where, like, if a running back is running track, and so he can't be part of some of the camps, or some of the practices during spring camp, all right, that's fine. It's a running back, and he'll be okay. Same with receiver. So I'm good with Jordan Faison saying lacrosse is number 1 right now. Totally fine with that. Drake Bowen, I was much more concerned about. Now, I feel better after some of the information gathering I've done. Drake and Max Bulla are really close and together this spring. So anything that Drake may miss because of a baseball game gets made up for, or even sometimes in advance. Hey, look, just this is what we're going to be doing. Drake is putting in the work off the field to make sure that he's caught up on everything. And then from what I understand, Drake's going to be at every practice. He's not going to miss any practice because of baseball. And also, Drake's not a starter on the baseball team. Jordan, I believe, is a starter on the lacrosse team. That also factors into it. So my concern about that has been alleviated a little bit, to be honest with you. So I feel better about that. And so that's why I feel like Drake is going to be a breakout player. And a lot of it's a combination of two things. One, opportunity. He's going to get a huge opportunity this spring as a Mike linebacker to be that guy. And I think he's going to take advantage. He's got a year under his belt. He was obviously here last spring, kind of, threw him to the fire. Him and the rest of the freshmen threw him to the fire a little bit. Came out in the fall. J.D. Bertrand, from what I've been told, took him under his wing in a big way, helped him learn, pushed him, challenged him, and really helped him develop. And then Drake earned starting jobs on special teams. So even though Drake didn't play a ton last year from a defensive standpoint, he played a decent amount the last couple games, but he didn't play a ton of snaps last year from a defensive standpoint. He is a kid that got a lot of playing time last year playing on special teams, and I think that's going to be important. And if you look at Drake's numbers on Pro Football Focus, for example, he only played 74 snaps on defense last year. 29 were against Stanford, and 18 of them were against Oregon State. But if you look at his special teams numbers, he had 161 snaps on special teams last year. So you're talking about a kid that now goes into the season with over 230 live game reps doing something for the football team. He was on kick return, he was on kick coverage, he was on punt return, he was on punt cover, and then he had 3 snaps on field goal block. And so Drake's going to got some much needed experience. He's big, he's downhill fast, he's got good change of direction, he's strong at the point of attack. He's going to have to learn to be more efficient with his footwork. He's going to have to be more assignment correct. He's going to have to learn to communicate more and get things set up. And there's a lot of those things that he's going to need to do. But the one thing that Drake can do is run. And we saw that on the play where we thought he got hurt. It was just like he gets through the hole really fast. And I don't know that he necessarily moves faster than J.D. Bertrand. Maybe he does. But it looks more impressive because he's so much bigger than what the linebackers were last year. I mean, he's every bit as tall as Marist was, but he's a lot thicker than what Marist was. He's taller and thicker than what JD was, and he's an explosive downhill athlete. So I have high expectations for Drake Bowen this spring. I don't know that he's going to be anything close to a finished product by the end of spring, in that there's going to be still technical work to do. There's going to be a lot of picking up the defense he's going to have to do. But we're going to be like, that dude's a playmaker. I think we're going to have that strong feeling by the end of spring that, yep, Drake is that guy. He's that guy that really emerged and took advantage of the opportunities that were there for him this spring and step up and be a big-time player. So I think Drake has a chance to be really, really good. And so, and somebody in the chat, Jason Smith made a great point that with JD could play faster once he wasn't having to think as much. And that's going to be the thing for Drake. And the one unique thing for Drake is, even though this is, if he wins a job, he's got to win a job first. But if Drake wins a starting job, this isn't his first year in the defense. It's his second year in the defense. And so that's going to help him be in a good place as far as going out there and having a grasp of what's going on a little bit. So that's my number one breakout of linebacker, is Drake Bowen. And I don't think that surprises anybody. The number 2 breakout is another linebacker, and I could have gone in a lot of different directions here. And if I was to have guessed, and I'm curious, I want to hear the response from you guys. I saw a lot of people picking the guy that I had, and I'm surprised by it. I have 2 reactions to it. Number 1 is, I love y'all because you guys are smart and you know football. But number 2 is, were you predicting what I was going to predict, or are you predicting what you were going to predict? Because my number 2 breakout at linebacker is not Jalen Sneed. It is not Kingston, who I love. It's not Preston Zinner. It's Jaden Ausberry. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Number 1, I think the kid has exceptional talent. You guys know that. I've been on the Jaden Ausberry bandwagon from day one, and was a huge gap closing player. Liked what I saw from him last spring, movement-wise. He's put on good weight. He's up to, he listed at 225, but I think he's going to be, or 220, but he's looks a lot thicker than that. He looks like he's all muscle this spring, where last spring he was kind of still developing a lot of that. And, Jaden's a guy that didn't get a ton of playing time this spring in the fall for Notre Dame. Played a little bit of special teams, played a little bit of linebacker, played 40 snaps on special teams all early in the year, because they basically played him on special teams in 4 of the first 5 games. He didn't play against NC State, played special teams against Navy, Tennessee State, Central Michigan, and Ohio State. He played a bunch of special teams on Tennessee State and Central Michigan. And then on defense, he only played against Tennessee State and Central Michigan. And the reason why is they wanted to preserve his red shirt. And I'm okay with that. But he only got 21 snaps on defense, but he got over 60 snaps last year, which is okay. It's a good place to start. So it's not so much the experience per se, but it's just the talent and the experience within the system. There's value to that. There's even more value to that experience in the system, and then playing like Drake, who had 230, football snaps last year. With Jaden, he got some burn, mop up duty, not a ton, like nothing that's like, oh, that experience has him ready to play right now. It's not that. It's that was nice, that was good, but it's experience within the system. He's now this is the second spring. He's had 2 winters under his belt. This will be his second spring under his belt. He's had a summer under his belt and a full season. And if Jaden Osbury is the player that I think he is, he's going to be a dude for Notre Dame sooner rather than later. Now, does that mean he's going to be a starter, rotation guy? It's too early to tell that. But I just have a feeling that Jaden Osbury is going to be a guy that we're looking at the end of spring saying that dude's making a ton of plays. Every practice we go to, that guy moves around great. You're hearing this from sources. You'll hear me talk about it. Other people talk, hey, my sources are saying this. I think he's a guy that we might hear a lot about this spring, and then, of course, finish the spring on a very high note. I have a feeling Jaden Osbury is going to end the spring as a guy that we're talking a lot about being a factor in the rotation next year. Now, whether that's as the number 2 behind Jack Kaiser in a rotation, and then Jack can maybe move around, or if that's as starting rover, which is where they have him playing a lot right now, whether it's number 2 I don't know where that's going to be, but I have a feeling Jaden Osbury is going to be a dude we're talking a lot about. I mean, the only thing he doesn't have is height. That's it. I mean, he's pretty long for his size, but he can run. He's got really easy change of direction. He's explosive downhill. He's got really strong hands. He can deliver some punishment, and he's smart. I mean, the thing about him in high school was he wasn't super technically sound in high school, but he just was so smart. I mean, his football IQ was exceptional. I mean, you could just see it. And then when you combine the fact he is a pretty darn good athlete with the fact he's really instinctive and really smart, you say, okay, this guy's got a chance to be really good. And so I don't know where he's going to play. I would love to see them move him back inside and put him at will. I really would. But right now he's getting a lot of work at rover. And I just think Jaden Osbury is a guy that by the end of spring is going to be like, wow, that guy's going to be an impact. And look, these 3 guys right now that I've talked about are all part of that 2023 class, which we thought had just a great pick, signee. You wish Keon Keeley would have stayed a part of it, because, man, there were some talented dudes in that class at corner, at linebacker, at D-line. There's a really talented class, and I think there's a reason why those guys are going to be breakouts. And there's several other sophomores that I thought about. I ended up not going with, but I thought about as potential breakout players for Notre Dame this spring. So far, Christian Gray, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, 323 players, to the class of 23 players that I think are going to be breakout players for Notre Dame by the end of the spring. My number 4 breakout player is Jason Onye. I'll just say who it is and then dive into why. I'm going Jason Onye because I don't expect. It's like somebody in the chat mentioned Riley Mills. I don't see for me, the way that that's a fine prediction. I don't care what Riley Mills does this spring. I think Riley Mills is already a pretty good player. To me, Riley Mills can't break out until he gets into the fall and takes his game into games. His improved play in the games. That's what would be the thing for me. Totally fine if somebody else wants to go with Riley Mills. I understand that one. But for me, it comes down to more so who are the guys that maybe weren't impact players last year. When I look at Jason Onye, he had a pretty good spring No, was it the spring last year? Or was it fall camp that he did? I think he had some really good moments last spring, uh, but he was still kind of raw, right? Still learning the position. Got a chance to get some playing time this year. Really, the first real playing time he's had in his career. He got a chance to have that last year. And I just have a feeling that when we go look at this upcoming season, that we're going to be talking about Jason Onye as being part of kind of like a three-headed monster inside, which I think it'd be great for Howard Cross and Riley Mills, because if they step up and are what we think they can be, if they're playing 45 snaps a game and you can get them down to like 40, 35, 30 and some of the weaker opponents, they're going to be fresher. They're going to be quicker. Fresher meaning fourth quarter. You put those guys in the field, they're fresh. O-line's kind of dragging, and you're blowing them up and you're putting the game away. But then also in November and then getting into the postseason, because now that you're talking about to win a championship, Notre Dame's got to play 16 games to win a championship. That is going to be so much more important to have sort of a load management situation earlier in the season and middle of the season. And I'm not talking like load management like the NBA has. I'm talking about it from hey, I don't need you to play 60 snaps a game. You can, but I want to make sure you're playing 45, 40, or in some games 30. Like if you're beating Northern Illinois by 20 plus points at halftime, there's no need to play Riley Mills and Howard Cross in the second half. Get Jason Onye and Donovan Hinish and these other guys in there. But that's part of it. But it's also like, hey, against these other teams, against the Texas A&Ms and against the Louisvilles and against the Stanfords and the USCs and the Florida States, I'm okay playing Jason 15, 20 snaps a game. And he can play nose and he can play three technique. If you get to the point where you're comfortable with him doing that, then you've got an opportunity to really take some of that burden off of your older players, and without losing production, because that's the key. Like if Riley Mills and Howard Cross are as good as I think they are and what their production was last year, it's hard to justify taking them off the field against Ohio State and putting in a Jason Onye or a Donovan Hinish when there's a big drop off in talent and production. Not talent, production, level of play, consistency, technique, all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, what's the series doesn't matter to you that you're willing to take those guys out? But when you say, hey, look, those are our dudes. Riley and Howard are dudes. They are great players. But when we put Jason Onye in the game, we don't miss a beat. And that's what Michigan had last year with that kind of their three-headed monster with Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, and Kenneth Grant. Like, it didn't matter who was on the field. You were getting a dude no matter which one of those three was on the field. If Jason Onye can be that player for Notre Dame, then it gives them a chance to use him more, to play him both nose and three technique if they choose to. And that's going to allow them to really pipe down a little bit on maybe some of the volume of reps that these guys get in the bigger games, which then means like, so how does that matter against Ohio State? Look, the reality is you're still going to want to play your dudes against Ohio State more than you play the guys who aren't your dudes. But it can get into a situation, however, where if you can trust Jason to go out there and play, I think he didn't play in that game, but I think the backup D tackles against Ohio State played like less than 10 reps. I'm gonna look at this real quick. Just give me a second. I'm gonna look this up and give you a specific number, because I think they had some guys injured and stuff like that. But Gabriel Rubio played 12 snaps. Howard Cross played 64. Riley played 50. And that was it. That's a lot of snaps. Well, if you have a guy like Jason, and I think Jason was hurt, but if you have a guy like Jason Onye that can go in there and say play 15, 20 snaps, 20 against a team like that, and maybe your number 2 nose guard or your number whatever can give you 5 to 10 snaps, and maybe Gabriel can still give you his 10 or 12, or Donovan Hinish or Brendan Vernon, whoever else breaks out. But if he can go out there and say, hey, I'm gonna play 20 snaps a game, and so Howard 64 goes down to 52. Riley's 50 goes down to 42 throughout the game. Then all of a sudden, on that last drive of the game, when you've got to make a stop, Howard's a little fresher, Riley is a little fresher, and then all of a sudden, those guys have a little bit more juice underneath them for when they go in and have to step into that big moment. And when you look at the rotation for Michigan last year, for example, Michigan played 2 more games than Notre Dame. Their D tackle who played the most last year was Mason Graham at 442 snaps. If you look at Notre Dame, Howard Cross played 610 snaps and Riley Mills played 535 because there wasn't that next guy that could provide you that same number of snaps. So they had Mason Graham at 442, Chris Jenkins at 418, and Kenneth Grant at 403. So they had that third guy that could play a lot of snaps and still be really productive, which allowed you to take some of the snaps down. And so then your starters, your studs, when they're playing in the fourth quarter, got 10, 12, 15 fewer snaps on their legs. Now they're a little fresher. Now that pressure on the final drive against Ohio State, where the quarterback throws it away, is a sack. Or I whoop this guard off the ball and he holds me because he knows I'm about to go get the quarterback because I'm fresh and he's got 70 snaps under his belt. Now all of a sudden, 2nd and 10, completion to move the chains turns into 3rd and 20. Or that 4th and 5 completion that they had turns into a 4th and 15 because I whooped my guy because I'm fresh and he had to hold me. It got called, and now it's 4th and 15. You know what I'm saying? And so when you've got that extra juice at the end of a game as a big guy, that can be really impactful in those moments. And it's fine to give them fewer snaps against Central Michigan. That's more of the bigger picture. Where are you in November? What's your workload been? I'm also talking specifically about those big games where, yes, they're going to play a lot more, but if I can take 10, 12 snaps off of their legs, shoulders, so to speak, then those instead of being on snap 50 on the final drive, or snap, in Howard Cross's case, snap 60 on the final drive, he's on snap 45, 48, 49, and he's got a little bit more juice, and you're able to close out those games. So I think that's why it's so important. And then, of course, bigger picture, take about 100 snaps off those guys, 150 snaps off those guys at the end of the year. All of a sudden, you're going to the postseason, and they're fresher, and they're able to kind of to play more. And especially for Howard, a guy that's 280 pounds, to play 600 snaps, that's a lot of snaps on that guy. And so I think it would be beneficial to him as well if he can take some reps off. But how do you justify as a coach? I'll say it again. How do you justify as a coach taking a guy like that off the field against Ohio State if you don't have a ton of faith in the guy after you? It's very, very hard. And so I think that's why you need someone. I spent a lot of time not talking about Jason Onye, but this is the thing. That's why this spring is so big for him, and why a breakout from Jason Onye matters to Notre Dame, because if Jason has that breakout where he's making a ton of plays and you've got more faith putting him on the field, you know, it's a whole different deal. And I'm seeing some people saying, well, the reason some of Michigan snaps were limited is because they had so many blood. Guys, Notre Dame blew out everyone they want. Notre Dame blew out every team they played out that they beat outside of Duke. Everyone. They blew out NC State. They blew out Tennessee State, Navy, USC, Pitt, Wake, Stanford. They blew them all out. The difference is, however, is that they had to play so much in those other games, but they were fresher. If you watch them play, even against the teams they're blowing out, go look at the first half rotation. They're rotating those guys in and out. That's the thing. So it's not like your backups got a ton more snaps. It's you've got that 3-man rotation. So the point being, so like for Notre Dame last year, the number 2 guy in snaps on the inside was Onye at 155. That was number 3. That was the number 3 guy, 155. If you look at the number 3 guy for Michigan, he had 403. You don't do that playing mop-up duty. You do that because you're a regular part of the rotation. They played Rayshawn Benny 244 snaps. Go watch the games. He's getting in the first half. And so that's really important. We saw that from Georgia on some of their really good teams. Ryan's talked about this a ton. They were able to be so dominant because they could take Jordan Davis off the field. They could take other guys off the field and put in another dude to play those reps in early in games. And so to me, I look at it like this. I think it's a situation where Jason Onye has the God-given ability to be that player, but he's had to put it together. He's had to put it all together. I think last year is going to benefit him a ton. As long as his attitude is in the right place, he's a guy to me that's going to come out this spring and say, hey, that is a dude now. Now you feel like, hey, we have a third dude up the middle, not just two dudes and good backups. Right now, Notre Dame has two dudes, and if Gabriel Rubio comes back, you've got three quality backups between Jason Onye, Gabriel Rubio, and Diamond Heinisch. Three, good, solid, give you 8 to 10 snaps a game, solid guys. You're okay there. They can get you through a game. What I want to see is Jason Onye break out to where you got three dudes now, and you can put him in all those different places. And so that's going to be a very, very interesting part for me, is to say, hey, he broke out. You feel better about it. You can play him at nose. You can play him at 3. And when you take Riley off the field or you take Howard off the field, you're not missing a beat production-wise. I think Jason is going to get there because I think this extra year of playing time helped him. I think for guys like him that are still kind of new to football, that taste, you got that little bit of taste. Like, have you ever tried a food for the first time as an adult? I mean, obviously there's times when, you eat certain things growing up, but there's things that there's things I've eaten that I never ate as a kid because I didn't like certain things. And I'm trying to my wife, for example, makes this really good bean dip. I don't like pinto beans. I never really liked pinto beans as a kid. I'd had them at this Mexican restaurant in Lima. Didn't really like them. My wife makes this appetite, this pregame thing of this bean dip. And so she's like, you got to try it. She made it for my players. So I had never had it before. She made it for my players when I was still coaching. We'd have our players over on Thursday nights. We'd make a big meal for them. And so she made this bean dip for them to have some chips and stuff. And she's like, you got to try it. I was like, I'm not going to try it. I'm not going to like it. But then you taste it and you're just like, it's just kind of like, you're like, oh my gosh, that was so good. Like, I had to taste now you crave it. Never craved it before because I'd never had it. I never knew what it was about. But then you try it and you're like, this is great. And then you crave it. You have that craving for it. I always thought going to Ruth's Chris was stupid. I'm like, why would I pay $60 for a steak when I can make steaks at home for a lot less than that? And then you go there and you're just like, it's so good. You're just like, oh my gosh. And now you crave it. Never craved it before until I went there a few years ago and tried it. And they're like, oh my gosh, now I get it. Now I understand why people pay this much for a steak. But you don't have that craving if you've never experienced what it feels like to be there. And for Jason, he got that taste last year. And if he's the competitor I hope he is, that taste is going to turn into a burning desire to get it again. Right. And so if he goes out and puts in the work that I think he's going to put in and hope he puts in, I think he's a guy we talk about at the end of spring. Is like, that is a really good football player. And not only do you have a great 3-man rotation inside, but when Howard and Riley leave for the NFL, you've got another dude to build around for 2025. And so I think Jason Onye is going to be that guy. My fifth one, and this is the one that I talk about, someone's going to break out. I just don't know who. We are going to see somebody break out at defensive end. I just don't know who it's going to be. It could be Jason, man, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Jason Smith, I know what you mean, BD. Same thing happened to me when I first listened to IB. Now, that means a lot to me. Truly. I really appreciate that. When you look at defensive end, it could be RJ Oben going from, good player for, 3 years at Duke to, wow, he's going to be a star. Could be that. It could be Josh Burnham figuring it all out. And that's a guy I kind of have my eye on, but I want to see how he transitions to the field end position first before I'm ready to call Josh a breakout, but the tools are there. It could be Jordan Patelho. It could be Junior Tuihalamaka. It could be Boubacar Traore. It could be Cole Mullins. It could be Bryce Young. I don't have a clue who it's going to be. But I have a feeling that, and here's why, guys. I just mentioned to you, I didn't even mention, Tyson Ford, who may play there. I didn't mention Logan Thomas because he's not there this spring. I mean, but there's guys that could play. Brendan Vernon could still slide back out there. There's so many. Josh Burnham, RJ Oben, Bryce Young, Jordan Patojo, Junior Tuihalamaka, Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins. That's 7 guys that are really talented. One of them's going to break out. I just don't know which one it's going to be. If we're getting here to the end of spring and none of those guys have broken out, that's a problem. That's a big problem. I just have enough faith in Al Washington and Al Golden and Marcus Freeman and the talent of these players to say somebody's going to break out. I don't know who it's going to be, but somebody's going to break out. Ideally, when we get to the end of the spring, we're talking about a couple guys breaking out. And I don't even care who it is. Like, I mean, we all have our, like, I'm real high on Josh Burnham, and I think he's got a chance to be really good. I think Boubacar Traore's got enormous potential. I think Bryce Young could be I don't care who it is. It just, I'm not high on Junior Chilamaka. You guys know that. But if it's him, great. Don't care. They just need at least one guy to break out. That's going to be the key. I just don't know who it's going to be, to be honest with you, because everybody's got their reason why they could break out, but then everybody's got but I'm concerned about that. If Josh Burnham was still playing Viper, I'd probably would have just gone with him. But because he's making the position change and you got to see what his weight is and all this kind of stuff, I'm just not as certain about it with him. So we'll have to see how that one goes. But that's going to be my final one. Somebody on the defensive line is going to break out. That's going to wrap it up for the breakout portion of the show. This went a lot longer than I thought it was going to go, but that was I enjoyed that discussion. A lot of really good feedback in the chat. That was really good stuff, guys. I appreciate that. We're going to move on to the wide receiver conversation next, and then we're going to talk about the NIL hearing that I saw. But before I do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And if you have not done so, I'm telling you, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You will not miss a beat. We had a conversation the other day. Guy did not like what Vince said about Steve Angeli. So comes on a board, kind of calls Vince out, but in a football way. And then he and I go back and forth about Angeli, but it was great. It was football talk. He laid out his case. I laid out my case. He pushed back on me. I pushed back on him. It was great football talk. And love that kind of stuff. And we're having a lot more of that on the board. So you definitely want to check that out. You're missing out if you have not done so. Going to talk about wide receivers next on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Topic number 3 today is going to talk about the wide receivers. The receiving discussion has been interesting because you literally cannot bring up anything about the wide receiver core without somebody rightfully and justifiably saying, I'll believe it when I see it. And so I want you guys to understand, I'm going to tell you that is not the stance you should have. Kind of been fun, but I also want to make sure you understand, I get it. I completely understand it. We've been here before is a response. We thought this guy was going to break out last year. I thought Tobias was going to break out last year. He had a great spring. I thought this guy was going to break. I thought that, Lorenzo Styles in 2022. But there's a reason why this is different. And I'm going to dive into it. And I'm going to talk about why talking about what has happened in the past isn't really relevant to this group and why we should evaluate this group for what it is and this staff for what it is. And what's the end result? What's the end game? To convince you guys that you should be really excited about this receiving core and about what they're going to do in 2024, because there's a reason to be excited about it. And I understand the reasons not to be. I get there. But the fun I'm going to have today is kind of breaking down why you should be excited about it and why we should all be able to look at it. And so to me, let's start off first and foremost with it's a different staff. And the staff that's there now, it's about track record, right? What's the reason a lot of you understandably have I'll believe it when I see it thoughts on receiver? It's because of what you've seen. It's because of what last year happened. It's because of we thought this guy was going to be good. We thought, Dion had a great spring last year, and then he ended up, not panning out. So Jaden Thomas was supposed to break out, and then he got hurt, and then Greathouse starts off great, then he gets hurt, and then, and then Tobias Merriweather has a really good spring, and then he kind of doesn't really do what he needs to do. And so there's all these expectations. 2022, Lorenzo Styles finished the 2021 year, good note, had 100 yards against Oklahoma State. He's ready to break out, and then he doesn't. And it's just kind of been every year. We've seen this, we thought this guy was going to be really good, but it didn't pan out. We thought this guy was going to be there, didn't really pan out. And the receiving core, if we're going to be honest, has been a problem for the last 3 years, really. I mean, even Kevin Austin, who put up really good numbers in 2021, struggled in some big games, struggled in some certain moments where if you could press, he was going to have a tougher game. I don't think did really hardly anything against Cincinnati in 2021. So it's one of those things where even when the numbers have been good, they haven't been impact players. Again, looking at Kevin Austin, big game against Wisconsin, big game against Virginia Tech, sandwich right in between there, Cincinnati, 1 catch for 17 yards. Couldn't get open, couldn't get separation, and, it just wasn't what you'd hoped he would be. Javon McKinley, really good senior year, plays really well against Clemson the first time. Just opportunities weren't there in some later games. He was a good player, but not that elite big-time player. And then Ben Skowronek was a really nice player, nice comp. But then after that, it's like, what did you have, right? So it's been a while since Notre Dame really had an impact receiving core. I'd actually argue go back to 18 when you had a receiving core, right? 19, you had Chase Claypool was really good, but the receiving core in 18 was really good. You had Chase Claypool, you had Miles Boykin, you had Chris Fink, who was really good that year. And so to me, it's like, okay, it's been a minute. I get it. But here's the thing I'll remind you guys of. Mike Brown wasn't the receivers coach last year. He wasn't the receivers coach in 2022. He wasn't the receivers coach in 2021. He wasn't the receivers coach in 2020 or 19 or 18 or any other time in Notre Dame's history. And you should evaluate it based on the job he's done. I said it when Chancey Stuckey was hired. It's a big risk. Saw some positives in year one, couldn't build on them. Simply put, he wasn't good enough to be here. Forget all the off the field stuff and all the drama and all that ridiculousness. Just as a receivers coach, he wasn't good enough. And so it really comes down to what's the track record of the coach that you hired. When Harry Hiestand got rehired again a couple years ago, why were so many people excited about it? Because of the track record. The O-line was terrible the previous year. In 2 of the last 3 years, it was subpar. 21, it was terrible. 19, it was subpar. 20 was pretty good. And as we found out, it's because Harry Hiestand spent the entire offseason working with that line and with Chris Watt, who was a GA on that team. But overall, it was disappointing. And so, but he has a track record. He has established himself. When you look at Mike Brown, you say, you don't judge Mike Brown and the receiving coaching on what happened with Chancey Stuckey or Del Alexander. You judge it on, well, what did he do? He did a pretty good job at Wisconsin last year, but more importantly, he did a very good job developing receivers in Cincinnati. Guys that have as much or less than the guys that are on the roster now. And so you say, okay, that should be the standard by which we judge expectations for the receiving core, not by the job Chancey Stuckey did. That's reason number one. Reason number two, Mike Denbrock wasn't the offensive coordinator last year. Mike Denbrock wasn't the offensive coordinator the year before that. Wasn't the offensive coordinator the year before that. And so to me, he hasn't been the offensive coordinator since when? 15 was the last time he truly controlled the offense. That was a pretty darn good receiving core that he had. And he was the receiver coach then. And also on top of being the offensive coordinator. Then you look at what he did. It was Cincinnati. He's part of him and Mike Brown developing a really good receiving core there. You look on LSU, great receiving core there. He's had talent, but he's gotten the most out of that talent. The production has been there. And so, does Notre Dame have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas on their roster? I don't think so, but they've got really good players. And to me, that's kind of where I look at it and say, that's what you should be judging the coaching off of. It's what they did, not what Chancey Stuckey and Del Alexander did. That's point number one. Because the counter to that is, yeah, but you don't have this, and this as players. That's my second point. It's a very fair comeback. What I was getting ready to say earlier when I was talking about Jaden Greathouse, that has me so excited about the receiving corps because I could have talked about 8 or 9 different guys breaking out. Guys, last spring, I don't even think they had 8 or 9 receivers on scholarship, much less guys ready to break out. And half those guys were freshmen. It's just a different era at Notre Dame because you have to evaluate the roster on what they've done. Who are the returners from Notre Dame? Well, Jaden Thomas, proven player, steady player, has done some really good things. And then Jaden Greathouse, pretty good freshman year. Jordan Faison, pretty good freshman year. Those are your returners. You didn't have that kind of proven experience last year. This year you do. Then you also welcome in 2 really talented freshmen. And so when you look at the rest of the receiving core and you look at the transfer portal, you talk about a guy last year, Notre Dame was bringing in a guy from Virginia Tech, Caleb Smith, who was a nice, solid player, we thought could give some depth. If Deion Colsey gets hurt or whatever, he could help you out a little bit. Guy that had 37 catches for 674 yards, 3 touchdowns as a senior, and had not done a ton prior to that. Nice player, right? Just good, steady guy, good ball skills, not great separation. You liked what you saw from him. Well, you're not going to get that this spring from Bo Collins, but guys, let's be honest about it. Bo Collins was a better player at Clemson than Caleb Smith was at Virginia Tech, same league. His numbers weren't quite the same because he was not the number one guy, but Bo Collins last year, 38 catches, 510 yards, 3 touchdowns. The year before that, Bo had 22 catches for 373 yards. And if you went back and watched some play, he started the season off really well before getting hurt. 2021, Bo finished the year off really well as a freshman, caught 31 passes for 407 yards as a true freshman that season. Had over 100 yards in 2 of the last 3 games. He had over 100 yards in a game at Louisville and had over 100 yards in a game at Wake Forest. So Bo Collins comes to Notre Dame with 3 career 100 receiving yard games under his belt. Guys, that's more than the rest of the roster has combined. The rest of the roster has one 100-yard game. I think Jordan Faison had that in the bowl game, right? That's not even your top transfer based on expectations, right? Your top transfer is a kid, Chris Mitchell. And I've heard it. I've heard the comments on him. Well, he played at a smaller school. All right, cool. But you can't dismiss the fact that this kid caught 64 passes last year for 1,118 yards and 6 touchdowns. You say, well, he played in was it Conference USA? All right, cool. That's a fair comeback. Very fair. Well, he did play 1 game last year on the road against an SEC team. He had 6 catches for 157 yards and looked like he belonged on that field. And so that's just the transfers. I'm going to talk about Jaden Harrison, who didn't really do a ton there. It's about the talent is much greater. The skill set is far more diverse. You've got big guys like Bo Collins and Deion Colsey and Jane Thomas that are more physical presences. You've got the outside vertical speed guys like Chris Mitchell and Cam Williams. Jaden Greathouse can do some of that. You've got slot guys. Jaden Greathouse can do that as well, but you've got Jordan Faison. You've got KK Smith. You've got Jaden Harrison. Micah Gilbert's another outside guy. Whereas last year, it was like Tobias and, once Deion got hurt especially, it was Tobias and then Jaden for like a week, and then it was just Tobias, and everybody else was a slot. And so there's so much greater talent diversity. But the other part, too, is in 2022, 2023, if Tobias Merriweather doesn't break out, the receiving core can't come close to reaching its full potential. He didn't, and it didn't. In 2022, if Lorenzo Styles doesn't break out, your receiving core can't reach its full potential. He didn't, and it didn't. 2021, if Kevin Austin doesn't reach his full potential, you're going to have some problems in your receiving core. He didn't, and it didn't. There's a difference with this group. If Jaden Thomas gets hurt again, I hope it doesn't happen, but it doesn't have the devastating effect that it had last year. If we have the same thing happens last year and Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas get hurt again, you're different now because then you had to move Jaden Greathouse over. Now you've got Bo Collins. You've got Micah Gilbert. You have an older Jaden Greathouse. If the version of Tobias doesn't pan out last year, if Tobias doesn't pan out, you had to turn to Rico Flores in the field. And he was not ready to be the player they tried to make him to be. Couldn't separate, was great blocker, but just kind of a mediocre pass catcher. And you saw it against the better teams in the schedule. He just couldn't get open unless it was designed. It was a design against a zone scheme, right? Just wasn't ready for that. Now, if Chris Mitchell doesn't break out, who's far more established than Tobias Merriweather, who came in last year with one catch, and again, guys, I'm still high on Tobias Merriweather. I stand by everything I said about him, his talent, and the reason he didn't break out. Some of it was on him, some of it wasn't. So this isn't me going back and saying, oh, Dion wasn't that, no, or Tobias wasn't that good. Yes, he was, but he didn't step up, partly on him, partly on others. But here's the thing. If he didn't step up last year, your go-to was Rico, who wasn't ready for that role. Now, if Chris Mitchell doesn't step up, who's far more established than Tobias was coming in last year, who had one career catch, you're now, okay, fine. You've got Cam Williams, who's a far better freshman talent than Rico Flores was. You've got Jaden Greathouse. You've got KK Smith. You have more. You have Micah Gilbert. There's more options. Same in the slot. Chris Tyree was your slot last year. He was a pretty good player. Well, what if he got hurt? You turn to Jordan Faison. He was pretty good. Jaden Greathouse, pretty good, right? So you saw what happened in the slot when you had more than one guy. Didn't matter who was in there. Jaden Greathouse produced when he was in there. Jordan Faison produced when he was in there. Chris Tyree produced when he was in there. Notre Dame got close to 1,000 yards receiving from the slot last year. If you go back and look at the numbers, the three guys that made up the slot position were close to 1,000 yards. They actually might have gone over 1,000 yards, but I know one of Jaden's big plays late in the year came with him lined up outside. That big touchdown against Wake was against when he was outside. But the margin for error piece is really important. And again, I haven't even talked about Logan Saldate. So I think that's another factor of why I think it should be really viewed differently, because there's not the same. Like last year, this time we had different varying debates about Tobias Merriweather. Some were higher on him, like I was. Others weren't high on him. Didn't think he was that good. Others were like, yeah, I think he's got some talent, but, which was a fair take. But it was one of those things where we all could agree that if Tobias doesn't step up, it's going to be a huge problem for the receiving corps. We could all agree to that. If this Chris Tyree transition, this is what we felt at the time, it ended up being better than we thought. But if the Chris Tyree transition doesn't work out, I don't know what the slot's going to look like, because a year ago at this time, we didn't have expectations for Jordan Faison. IB was high on Jordan Faison as a walk-on. Ryan and I were talking about that today because we had him on our signing day show. Not in a million years did we see him doing what he did as a freshman. We thought maybe he could be that as a junior or senior, but not as a freshman. And so there's a lot of angst that if this guy doesn't do this, if Deion Colzie 2 years ago doesn't break out in 2022, and he didn't, played well late, but didn't, you had no big guy. You had nobody with size that could help step up. There was such a thin margin for error that anybody not panning out was going to crush you, because here's the reality. Somebody at this receiving corps is going to get hurt. Somebody amongst this receiving corps is not going to be as good as we think they're going to be. Somebody's not going to take well to the system or do this or do that. There's going to be something, multiple somethings that are going to happen, because this is football and that's what happens. That's the way it goes. But the reason that should not at all change the optimism is because there's so much greater talent on the roster. And that's kind of what has me excited. You've got proven receiver developers. Mike Denbrock proved that he can produce big-time receiving cores. He's done it at 3 places, including Notre Dame. He developed a very strong receiving core in 2015. He developed a very strong receiving core at Cincinnati as the coordinator, and then he developed a really good receiving core at LSU. Mike Brown produced a very good receiving core at Cincinnati and was in developing that at Wisconsin. One of the funny things about Wisconsin last year is, their receiving core was okay, but their best receiver last year was a kid that he brought over from Cincinnati, which I thought was, it was a kid he brought from Cincinnati. Will Pauling was a kid he brought up from Cincinnati. And, Will Pauling was a kid that at Cincinnati the year before caught 12 passes for 122 yards. And then the year before that, 1 catch for 6 yards. But Mike Brown developed him. He comes over to Wisconsin and in the Big Ten catches 74 passes for 337 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's development. That's what receiver development does. And so, you look at the kid, they had a kid from Wisconsin was a good player, Oklahoma State, that was a good player. But he did a really nice job of getting players that he had developed at another place and turning them into good football players last year. That's what he did. And so he look at what he did at Cincinnati with the group they had a couple years ago with Alec Pierce and Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker. Those guys that he developed, guys that he had produced. And so to me, when I look at what he has done, look, the track record is there. And so when you combine that track record with the talent, with the depth of talent, it should give you a reason to be excited about this group and not say, well, I got to see it. The whole I got to see it thing, guys, that's very true at everywhere. Everywhere. That's totally fair. But it shouldn't sap your excitement because, again, this isn't Chancey Stuckey's room. This isn't Del Alexander's room. This is Mike Brown's room. This is Mike Denbrock's room. And you have to not assume, but you have to expect a level of improved production because that's what they've done. That's the track record they have, is taking rooms and getting the most out of them. They've proven it. The other part is the competition. And this is something that has me excited as well. And I got a super chat about the receiving core that I will answer before we move on to the final piece. But I believe that in the past there was a problem with competition because you just didn't have enough people there. So this guy knew he was going to play. That guy knew he was going to play. There were certain attitudes that had to be kind of catered to because you had to. And if I punish this guy for his attitude, then guess what? I don't have any receivers. I don't have anybody who can play. That's not the case this year. There's much more of a, you better step up or this guy's going to beat you out. Or, fine, you want to have that attitude, go sit over there. You get in and you get in, right? And you get in. You're my 3-man rotation now. That's a huge thing. The other part of the rotation that has me excited, or competition has me excited, is there's two types of competition, and I'm talking about not of a human being, but of a group, right? A receiving core. There's internal competition, which I just talked about, right? Like at every single position, X, Z, slot, all 3 of those spots, there is competition. If this guy doesn't play well, like if Chris Mitchell doesn't make the transition we need him to, there's Cam Williams, there's Jaden Greathouse, there's KK Smith. You could move Jaden Thomas over there easily. You could move Bo Collins over there easily. He's got to step up or he won't play. If Jaden Thomas doesn't step up in the boundary, then you've got Deion Colsey. You've got Bo Collins ready to play there in the fall. You've got Micah Gilbert that can play that position. And Cam Williams is much more prepared to play that position as a true freshman than Jaden Greathouse was because he's taller, he's thicker, and he's faster. So you could even put Cam over there if you needed to. And I was surprised at how big Cam Williams was. That was one of the things that surprised me first day of spring practice. Like, that kid's a lot bigger than I thought he was going to be. So same thing with the slot. If Jaden Greathouse doesn't step up in the slot, you've got Jordan Faison. You've got Jaden Harrison. KK Smith could also play the slot. And I still think that's Jaden Thomas's best position. And so in the past, if this guy didn't play well, not only were you in trouble at that position, your receiving core as a whole was a problem. And that's the biggest, besides the change in coaching, that right there, that internal competition is the biggest change because of that depth. The second part of competition is external competition. And I'm not talking so much about your opponents, which is important, but I really feel like the best external competition for a receiver, and this is from my experience, is when you are getting challenged every single day in practice by the guys that are trying to cover you. That is huge. And I've been to some places. When I was at Duquesne, it was this way. When I was at Christopher Newport, it was this way, where, man, we had so many great battles in practice. I mean, there were times I'll tell you this, my time at Christopher Newport, my receivers never played a better cornerback than the kid they went against every day in practice in one-on-ones in 707 and Rob Rodriguez. Never played a better kid than Rob in a game. Never. When I was at Duquesne, I don't know that we ever played a better duo at cornerback than the 2 kids we had. It was Michael Bell. I can't remember Kyle's last name, but we had 2 kids at corner that were pretty good players. That's some young guys who were pretty good there too. But we got tested every single day. And there were days they kicked our butts and days we kicked their butts. But it made us so much better on Saturdays. And so not only do you now have the internal competition at your position, and of course there's individual competition like, hey, I have a drive to be great. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more group wise. There's that internal competition at each position, but then that external competition where, okay, how do I know that the boundary is going to be good? Because they're making plays against Benjamin Morrison. How do I know that Chris Mitchell is going to be a good player, or that Chris or Cam Williams or KK Smith or whoever? Because they got to go make plays against Christian Gray. And they got to go make plays against Jaden Mickey. They got to go make plays against Xavier Watts in certain situations. They got to make plays in the slot against Jordan Clark and Micah Bell and Clarence Thomas and who are talented players and or proven players. And so when you start thinking about that, if the receivers are playing well, there's a greater confidence that, hey, they're going to be pretty good because who they're playing. If they're not necessarily playing great, it's kind of like, well, this is good for them because they're having to learn that lame like press release move that your coach taught you in drills ain't gonna fly, because every time you try it against Benjamin Morrison, you get jammed. Every time you try this double move thing against Christian Gray, it doesn't work because he's this. And it makes you better because you got to go back to the lab at that point in time and say, okay, tried this out. It's not working. This guy gets me every time. What do I got to do? What do I got to do with my top ends to finally get some separation against this guy? Okay, I got to get better here. I got to get better there. And it just makes you so much better as a player. And then it makes your group so much better. And you start to get some camaraderie because instead of battling against each other for starting jobs, you're now battling against them. And so when you do have that success, you have it. And one of my favorite parts, though, of the first practice was when they made a big play down the field. And Mike Denbrock was like, get back in the huddle. We do that all the time here now. And it was such a great comment because it's like, hey, we're raising the bar. We're raising the bar here. I don't want you guys to get excited because you made a play down the field. That's what you're supposed to do. And it was such a great comment because it's an attitude change. And that's partly why Mike Denbrock is successful. It's partly why Mike Brown is successful. The attention to detail he showed, it's just one practice, guys. But I'm telling you, I've been at Bowling Green when Urban Meyer and his staff was there. I've watched Urban Meyer coach receivers. I've been at Notre Dame. I've been at Maryland. I've been a lot of different places working with Division I coaches and seeing how they practice. And I don't know that I've ever seen anyone pay more attention to detail with receivers than probably Urban Meyer. Is the only person I've ever seen work with receivers that just paid more attention to detail than just that one practice I saw from Mike Brown. It was I mean, just every little detail. And that's, for me, that's what I believe in. I mean, I think that is so important for receivers in any kind of offense, but especially this one. And that's something that has me very excited about what this group can be. Very excited about what this group can be, because you have that internal and external competition, and then you have people leading it that have the proven experience of saying, "Hey, we can get the most out of you," and that's why I'm excited. That's why I'm excited. That's why you should be excited. It doesn't mean that you don't have some level of I got to see it first, right? I get that. I completely understand that. We need to see it with a lot of things. But it's okay to allow yourself to be excited about it. And that's kind of the point of this conversation, because this isn't the same situation. It's not, we've been here before. No, we haven't, because we've never seen Mike Brown coach receivers at Notre Dame. We've never seen Chris Mitchell at Notre Dame. We've never seen Cam Williams at Notre Dame, or Bo Collins at Notre Dame, or Jade Harrison at Notre Dame, or Micah Gilbert at Notre Dame. We've never seen that. We've never seen the sophomore version of Jaden Greathouse. We've never seen Mike Denbrock with this kind of players, or this with Mike Brown at Notre Dame. We've seen Mike Denbrock. Not a squirrel alert. The neighbors, we're in the upper level, and you can look down into the backyard of our neighbors across the way, and they both have dogs. And every time Sadie sees one, that's how she reacts. If it was a squirrel, she'd have lost her mind. She startled me multiple times this last couple of weeks with, she sees a squirrel and she starts going nuts, because she'll stand there and her feet start going like this, and she sounds very scary. And she's not very big. She's a little old dog, as you guys have seen from her in the past. She's still growling. So I apologize about that. the point I was making is that we've seen Mike Brown produce. We've seen Mike Denbrock produce at Notre Dame. So the people that are in charge of producing are not the people we saw fail in the past. They're people that have succeeded, and there's no reason to think that they can't or won't succeed again here. If the talent is there and the coaching is there and the system is there, which it all is there, then there's a reason to be excited. And I think you all should be excited. Going to move next into the NIL conversation. But before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. What's funny is normally when Sadie starts barking, Rita doesn't have a clue what she's barking at. She'll just start running up and howling because, as you guys can see, Rita is a coonhound, and she's definitely got a coonhound bark, or I should say howl. And she'll just – so I wish I could show you guys, but there's like a desk beside the desk I'm on, and we have 2 dog beds. It was supposed to be my reading room like desk, but Sadie quickly took that over, and there's 2 beds on there. And the other day, Sadie was barking at something. I think it was a squirrel in the backyard, maybe a rabbit. And Sadie's barking. So Rita is laying there like she is now. And she jumps up and she jumps on the thing and starts howling. But she's got her back turned to the window. So she doesn't even know what she's howling about. She's just howling because Sadie's barking. It was adorable. It was annoying, but it was adorable as well. Because she just was like, hey, Sadie's howling, so I'm barking, so I must be barking. So apologies about that, but thank you all for understanding that's kind of how it's got to be today until the missus gets home. Final part of today's show, I do want to share some thoughts on what I saw yesterday from watching the committee hearing. And I would encourage all of you, especially those of you who are making comments about what this person should or shouldn't say. This person doesn't have a right to say this because he's done that or he didn't do this or whatever. Just listen to it. Because I'm so tired of that part of the conversation. Number one, I've realized a lot of people don't know what the term hypocrite actually means. Number one. Number two, but like if the greatest coach of our generation can't speak on this issue, who can? And someone said, well, Dabo can. Well, Dabo tried and people shouted him down as well. The reality is that you need the people with the biggest voices to be speaking about this issue. And the thing that I took away is so many of the comments about this are so lazy. And well, now that players are making money, that has nothing. I watched it, guys. I watched it now. I'm at an hour and 23 of an hour and 37-minute video is what I've watched. There's nobody here saying they shouldn't make money. There's nobody here saying we should put a cap on how much NIL money they can make. There's nobody here saying it's not right that players are making money. There's nobody saying that. Somebody's saying, well, hey, Nick Saban used to pay players all the time. Now he's mad about it. Yeah. If you buy the premise, and I do to a degree, that Alabama bought players, he has even more reason to speak to what he's talking about because they paid players. They had other schools offering kids money back then under the table, but he still understood the importance of how to develop young people and did a great job developing young people. And this notion that Nick Saban doesn't, only cares about himself. Coaches only care about themselves. That's so lazy. It is. Are there some like that? Absolutely. I looked this up. The Athletic had an article yesterday. Nick Saban's players at Alabama have gone on to make $2.26 billion in the National Football League. $2.26 billion. And one of the comments he talked about yesterday was the fact that one of the concerns NFL teams are having is that in the last few years, players are showing up with they're not developed as people. They're not developed as players. They're more entitled. So these things are hurting these players' ability to be who they need to be at the next level. And that was a big part of it. And Nick Saban has a track record of developing young people. And I thought it was funny. So he didn't tell people to go to class. Well, he didn't really spend a lot of time talking about going to class. He's talking about a lot of other things. And so I'm going to get into some of the things that were discussed, share sort of my opinion on the whole thing and why I think people that are being critical of Nick Saban are missing the boat. There's certainly criticism that can be lobbied against Nick Saban for the way that he ran his program. There's no question. I think Nick Saban should have cared more about making sure his players were getting high-quality educations. In some instances, I think that's true. Certainly, I've heard it's better than it used to be. But we all know there's plenty of kids at Alabama that don't give a rip about academics, and they're not being encouraged to do so. But Nick Saban has always kind of said he's been kind of, he doesn't say it directly, but he's always been kind of upfront and honest about the fact that when it comes to that, it's like his job is to develop these people for the next level, to win championships and develop them for the National Football League. That's his primary concern. And there's never been anybody better at that, ever. And so isn't that kind of where you're wanting to go? And that's where you should be wanting to go. And so I think he absolutely should speak on this topic. I think he absolutely should be speaking on, what is happening now, because no one has a problem with our players making money. People have a problem with the manner in which that money is being used as an enticement, the attitudes in which people are so focused on it that it becomes detrimental to the overall team product that matters. It becomes detrimental to their ability to be developed, to go to the next level. This notion that people think it's okay for a kid to every single year transfer from one school to another to make money, you may think that's okay. That's not good for young people, because what you're doing is you're losing your ability to, number one, get a degree, because you can't transfer 4 times in 4 years and graduate on time. It's virtually impossible. Number two, you're losing out on a lot of opportunities to develop as a young person, to prepare yourself for the next level. So if you go out and you make $1 million in 4 years, or $2 or $3 million in 4 years because you're going to handle money, that's great. I hate to break it to you, $1 million doesn't go as long as it used to go, as far as it used to go. It doesn't. It's not the same kind of life-changing money it was 10, 20 years ago. It's just not. And when you are sacrificing the potential to earn $50 million to make 5 now, that's not smart. Do you make 2 now and then make 50 later? Is that guy better off than the guy that makes 5 now and makes 2 later? And so those things need to be part of the process. This is a very complex issue. And when I see people say lazy things like, well, coaches do this and coaches do that and all this other kind of stuff, it's just lazy, because coaches are employees. Coaches are employees, which means if I don't do my job, you can fire me on the spot. Dan Mullen 2 years ago got fired in the middle of a season. You don't see players getting fired in the middle of the season. It just doesn't have, you may get benched or whatever, but it's a completely different type of situation. And so it's just lazy. But the other part is, there are things that are happening in the coaching world that I don't agree with and I don't approve of. But just because the coaches are that, you can fix that problem later. That doesn't mean that it's okay with the stuff that we're seeing now, or that a coach who was an employee and made decisions based on money can't then speak to the ills of what's going on in college football right now. Because again, I know of 0 coaches that are publicly saying kids shouldn't make money. I don't know of any of them. I don't know any coaches saying they shouldn't make money. I don't. And so to me, if you're going to take the coach if you're going to tell me that a guy that's won 7 national titles and has developed players that have gone on to earn over $2 billion somehow can't speak to this issue, then who can? That's the part that bothers me. And I wanted to kind of get that rant out of the way now. That doesn't mean that you can't be critical of the way Saban did certain parts of his job. You can absolutely be critical of the fact that I don't believe he put enough emphasis on developing the scholastic part of a student athlete. You can say, well, my kids graduated. Okay, I know a lot of people that graduated but were literally in a drunken stupor for 4 years of college and got really not a lot out of it. But they showed up enough to pass tests and get their degree at the end of the day. 2.1 GPA, because I was high half the time I took this test and I was drunk half the time I did that. And I was just smart enough to kind of get by. I know people that did that. I went to school with people that did that. Just because you got a piece of paper and walk doesn't mean you got an education. I believe that Nick Saban, based on things I know and things I've heard, did not put enough emphasis on that part. I'll always be critical of that. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be speaking on the things he spoke on yesterday. It doesn't mean that he's not right about the things that he spoke on yesterday. Doesn't mean that his guidance isn't necessary and beneficial based on what he spoke on yesterday. And I get so tired of that. Well, this person made a mistake here, so their entire opinion is invalid because I don't like how they did this thing. That's nonsense. That's that lazy lack of intellectual honesty that we have, because if doing something wrong means that you can't speak on things, then no one should speak on anything ever. Nothing. We should all just be mutes, because everybody does things imperfectly. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody does things that are probably not the way that someone else would do it. That's true for everyone, including Lou Holtz, including Marcus Freeman, everybody. So this whole purity test that some of you have, that, well, I don't like the way Nick Saban did this. And here's the dumbest one. Nick Saban's mad because he can't dominate the way he used to. That is the dumbest thing I've heard. Y'all did just watch Alabama beat every single team in the SEC this past year, right? 0 losses to SEC teams this year. 0. Didn't lose to any SEC teams this year. Dominated the SEC. Beat everybody, including Georgia. They went to the college football playoff. He just signed 2 great classes. His 2023 class might have been the best class he's ever signed. He's dominating the NIL era. And he told people, hey, look, if you don't fix this, I'm going to take advantage of it. And he did. So you're telling us, and here's what drives me nuts. Dabo said, I'm not going to partake in it. And the same people criticized Dabo for not taking part. You're not going to win if you don't do this. And then, so shut your mouth. And then when Saban, who did take advantage, speaks on it, well, you took advantage of the system, you should shut your mouth. Pick a lane, people. Pick a lane. Either only people who don't partake in it can talk about it, or they can't, because you all seem to find a way to criticize whoever talks about it. And so it's like, you're just bitching to bitch. That's basically what it comes down to. You just want to take this high and mighty, I'm pro player thing, and you've never played the game or never coached the game. And then some of the people that did play the game that are saying these things, I don't know what they're talking about. Because, like, that was not your experience. You know that. You know that if you'd had a chance to play for Nick Saban, you'd have taken advantage of it. You know you would have. And it's just frustrating because I feel like people are trying to, it's just this groupthink thing. Well, this guy said this, well, I got to be on board. It's like what happened a few weeks ago at Notre Dame. Stephen A. Smith and Paul Feinbaum and Christopher Russo, they say the most idiotic, unintelligent things. And the whole next week, that's all anybody talked about, because it's groupthink. Well, and nobody has the balls. And that's why I do respect Pat McAfee, even though I don't agree with a lot of things he says, because he'll say what he thinks, whether people like it or not. There's too much of this groupthink crap that goes around. And again, if Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney, who are polar opposites of how this thing have approached and are without a doubt the 2 best coaches of the last decade, can't speak on this, then who can? Who can? Who passes your purity test that says, okay, they are perfect. They never did anything wrong. They graduated 100% of their players. They never paid anybody. They had perfect discipline. They did all these things perfect. Who is that guy? The only person I know that's been that way died about 2,000 years ago on a cross. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you. But if based on your purity test, no players have a right to speak on this, no coaches have a right to speak on this, nobody has a right to speak on this, which is just ignorant. It means we can't talk about it. And so, yes, point out the things that Nick Saban did incorrectly during his career. I'm all about it. There were times when he would sacrifice discipline for players that needed it because it would help him win games. Never, ever approved of that. I understood why he did it. I didn't like it. Okay. But that doesn't mean he can't talk about this. And it doesn't mean he's not right on this. And if because a guy, it's like, oh, well, I don't want to listen to this guy because he's a Republican. Or I don't want to listen to this guy because he's a Democrat. Has nothing to do. Is he right or is he wrong? Is he speaking truth or is he not? That's all that matters. And this whole thing with Nick Saban, where people who I know for a fact did not listen to the testimony, have these really strong opinions about whether or not he should or shouldn't say something because they read a statement. I had somebody that literally, I wrote an article, you guys read it, where I said, Notre Dame is the last independent because of greed and money. That was the title. Why? Because it's the greed and the money of the conferences and the NCAA that caused everybody else to leave. But some people read that, only read the headline, and got pissed at me. I should be fired. by myself, apparently. I should fire myself. Or how dare I say this about Notre Dame? It's like, you clearly didn't read the article. And there's so many, they'll read a quote from Nick Saban without any context. Nick Saban had a comment yesterday where he said something along the lines of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It was a response to what was asked by a senator from West Virginia about how small states like West Virginia can compete with bigger states like Texas and Florida. And nobody that's actually responded to that comment has actually responded to the context in which he made the comment, because he's right in his comment. And so I just wish that we had more people that had intellectual curiosity and had any ability to like take a complex issue and say, let's be adults and talk about this. It's just, let me throw this flamethrower out there so I get social media engagement. And that is completely destroying our ability to have discourse about important topics, because everybody's looking for their social media fix. There's I was in a debate with some guy the other day, and his proof of him being right was the number of people that liked and responded to his post in support, not the merits of the argument. It's, I had X number of likes. That's what we've turned into. And you've got so many people that are unwilling to take a hard stance and say, hey, this is wrong. This is what people that follow me will like me to say, so I'm going to say it. And then you push them at all to have to vet out their process. Well, I just was saying it in jest, or I just was kind of joking, or I was just, this is just, and there's no depth at all to their conversation. It's like, before I was a Christian, I used to love debating Christians, because it would take like 2 questions to get them to be like, I got no idea what to talk about, because all they could do was regurgitate what they heard from their youth pastor. And once you kind of knock that argument out of the park, then nothing. There's no foundation to their belief system and their knowledge. And that's what happens here in social media. You get these people that just, why do you believe this? Well, I heard so-and-so say something. Well, if all you're doing is following along with the group thing, then you have no core conviction. You have no depth of why you believe what you believe. And so it just frustrates me. And so that's my stance on this Nick Saban pushback. I have no problem with anybody that wants to say, I don't like the way Nick Saban ran certain aspects of his program. But 2 things you can't say. 3 things, really. Number 1, you can't say, well, why is he only speaking up now? Because that's just a lie, or you just don't know what you're talking about. He has been talking about this for years. He even gave a warning after year 1. So one thing that's true, and I've heard this from a lot of people, is Alabama wasn't really living in the NIL world the way that other teams were. And because Nick Saban didn't really want to embrace that, not the NIL world, the buying players thing. He was all for his players getting paid. It's using it to get other people. Didn't really like it. But he said, if you don't fix this, then I'm going to have to take advantage of it. And the next year, they didn't do anything to fix it. And he went out and signed the best class probably he's ever had. So he's like, look, my job is to win. This is the system you created. I'm telling you, I'm going to take this system. I'm going to beat you even worse than I did before. And for people to be like, well, he's just mad because, guys, Bama's not coming down because of NIL, folks. I hate to break it to you. Bama's going to be able to dominate just like they always did if he wanted to do it. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And so that needs to be gone. The whole, he ran his program this way, so he can't speak on it. That needs to be gone. And the final piece is like, listen, there are legitimate criticisms that you can lobby against Nick Saban, but those criticisms do not mean he doesn't have the right, the ability to say what he's saying about this topic. It doesn't make him wrong on this topic. It doesn't. And so if you're someone who thinks that, all Nick Saban cared about was money, I saw someone say something stupid about like, Nick Saban had a $20 million house. So what does that have? What is that? That's just you trying to say something that you think is cute, that you think your subscribers are going to like, and, oh, you're so smart. No, you're not. You're dumb. You're not very smart. And it shouldn't matter. I mean, it's a non-3 person, I think, or 24/7 sports person. So it shouldn't surprise you, but it's lazy. Nick Saban having 20. Nick Saban's not, one of the things he bragged about is all the deals that Bryce Young had, him and the AD. The only guy that kind of bothered me was the AD, but that's a different conversation. But the fact that Nick Saban has embraced the true NIL aspect of it, but pushed back for the pay for play, the argument he actually made, if you were someone who has the ability to actually like listen and absorb and learn, even if you don't agree, which we should all be, but we're not, you're going to say, okay, there's some things he did that I don't like, but that point right there, that's exactly what we all believe. And that's the driving thing that drives me nuts. Everybody complains about the current Wild Wild West. But whenever someone speaks up against it, well, you don't have a right to speak on it because you're the Republican, and you can't speak on it because you're a Democrat, and you can't speak on it because you paid players or you coached this or you did that. Again, we're back to this thing where nobody can speak on it because they have some disqualifying character. It's ridiculous. The fact is if Nick Saban can't speak on this, then just let's shut up and just let it be what it is, because no one can speak on it. Let's get into some specifics of the actual conversation, because I think that's important. Number one, with Nick Saban and the AD, it was Nick Saban, it was the AD at Bama, the Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC. It was the two Cavender twins who should not have been there. I'm sorry. You couldn't find two student athletes, even female student athletes, that had more knowledge of what's going on than them. They were useless in this conversation. You had an attorney who's an NIL attorney who I actually think had some really good insight. I thought I was going to hate that guy because, again, my prejudice towards these NIL attorneys, I do not like the vast majority of them that I see on Twitter. This guy was real sharp, really good. I thought he did a really nice job, brought some really good stuff to the table. And then there was a guy that is the head of the collectives. There's a collectives association. He was a part of it. And then a bunch of different senators, Republicans, Democrats. It was one of the most bipartisan things I've ever seen, where people are like, hey, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's find some answers. I thought it was great. And we don't see that much in politics anymore. And for that reason alone, I think you should listen to it. A couple things. Number one, no one is against NIL. I didn't hear one person say NIL is bad. I didn't hear one person say we need to cap NIL. I heard none of that. Everybody was like pro NIL. It's about, and Nick Saban talked about this. We've been doing this branding thing for a long time, right? And it's about your branding to help prepare you for the next level. And it's paid off again, $2.26 billion. And that's going to go up higher because he's going to have more top 10 picks again this year. Everyone is against the pay for play aspect of it. And the biggest thing is you saw even the NIL lawyer was against the portal the way that it is now. I think what you're seeing from this group was a pushback against a couple things. And this is getting into the actual the nuts and bolts of it. Nick Saban talked about this. He's very pro NIL, but he's against the booster driven collectives from the standpoint of, these guys are getting this money and they're using it to like go buy players. He doesn't like that aspect of it. And most coaches don't like that aspect of it. It's a necessary evil, but they don't like it. There's also a lot of issues with the way people are being developed in this era. There's so many. One of the people, I'm trying to remember who it was, talked about one of the big things. I think this might have been Jim Phillips, but he talked about protecting student athletes. That's a big thing behind a lot of things that people talked about. So here's some things here's some takeaways from those who didn't watch it. I would encourage you to watch. Number one, everyone's pro NIL. Everyone has accepted the fact that NIL is a part of this. That needs to be, anyone saying that this was about players not getting paid didn't listen. And they're just responding to what other people said. That, and at no point in time was that ever a part of the conversation, ever. It was always about this is what it is. It is these other aspects. NIL, we embrace it. It's a part of it. We like it. Let's protect it. And let's protect the players within it. I'll get to that. Other issues were basically creating safe havens is one word that was used. They're all against employment. Even the NIL attorney and the collectives guy were against college athletes being called employees. And you even saw some of the Democrat senators who just, not trying to get political, but there's been more Democrat that I've seen. There's been more Democrat politicians pushing for employment than Republican politicians. Those that know me know I don't have a positive view of either side of that aisle. But there were both of them that were, at least at this committee, seemed to be against the idea of employment because of, there's a lot. One of the AD said something which I didn't even think about. There are so many things that we do for student athletes that are not taxable. Tuition, room and board, all these different things. You make them employees and all that stuff gets taxed. And so that was interesting. Title IX protections, they're going to have to do something about Title IX. And then, of course, some antitrust stuff, which is a little bit too deep to get into in this conversation. Basically, it's like we need to be able to govern ourselves and have protections from you that allows us to do this. Because one of the things that was talked about is the senator from Tennessee. She doesn't like the new, president of the NCAA for whatever reason. She didn't express it, but she talked about rules enforcement. And the thing that was discussed by multiple people up there was, well, you can feel whatever you want to feel about the NCAA, but the reality is there's no subpoena power. There's only so much the NCAA can do. Now, I think the NCAA is full of crap, to be honest with you. I mean, we can do all that kind of stuff, but it really came down to being able to say, hey, there needs to be a body in charge of all this. And what should the government's role be? And basically they're saying, look, we need to be protected from some of these lawsuits. We need to be able to enforce our own rules, which is a whole different conversation for a different day. And we need to come up with certain, this is a big one. This is why it needs to be a federal case. People say, politics should be out of it. Well, it can't be. Because once schools start filing lawsuits, once, these labor unions start getting players to do this, it starts kind of crossing over state lines, so Florida's passed their NIL rules and Tennessee's passed their NIL rules and Texas passed their NIL rules. And the reality is it's not the same in every state. They want to have some uniformity to the way NIL is done. I didn't hear anyone talk about uniformity from a numbers standpoint, which I hope they never get to. But that's a big thing because you need to have some level of this is the same everywhere, whether it's here. My issue with that, my immediate pushback against that was a lot of them talked about we need to have things that are equal. We can't have this school saying, this is our rules because we're in this state, and this is our rules in this state. We need to have equity. They use the word equity. And in this instance, they were actually using the word equity appropriately, meaning we need to have a level playing field when it comes to certain aspects of it, revenue sharing, things like that. But my response is, why are you guys pro equity when it comes to NIL, but you're not pro equity when it comes to payouts from TV revenue? So the AD at Bama, who has a lot of influence with other ADs and obviously with the commissioner of the SEC, you guys want equity in the NIL sphere, but you want to go into a playoff system in which the Big Ten and the SEC get a higher payout of this. So my hope is that there's some ADs that listen to this, and if certain rules get passed for equity in regard to NIL and revenue sharing, and this is how I think it should go. Revenue sharing should basically be this. We get X amount of dollars that goes towards the players, right? And whatever revenue producing sports, okay? And so every student athlete gets X amount of dollars, and then put caps on collectives. So let's say that they say, hey, look, every kid's going to get 20 grand a year. I'm just throwing out a numbers. It's just making a point. And then you say, okay, they can do that. And collectives can't give players more than 20 grand as well. So every player on scholarship is going to earn 40 grand no matter what. That's their version of rev. And again, I'm just throwing out numbers. So the rev share is going to be this. The collectives can do this. This is how much you have to raise. Okay, fine. You've got that down. And then whatever dudes do NIL or ladies do NIL outside of that, that's good for them. God bless America. There needs to be some level playing field. But I'm hoping that once that rule gets passed, that somebody then brings another lawsuit to say, hey, why is it okay? Why do we need equity here, but we're not doing it here? My hope is that out of all this insanity comes two things. Number one, well, three things: revenue sharing, getting rid of using NIL and these things as an enticement for coming to a school, whether portal or high school. And then the third thing, that somehow this can go back to TV and playoff revenue and saying, if these things have to be equal, that has to be equal. And if these things have to, if amongst Power 4 or 5 schools, that the NIL has to be the same, and that language has to be the same, and that rev share needs to be same, and this needs to be same, then the TV money needs to go back to this. So somehow, some way, get that 1984 decision of the NCAA versus the Board of Regents at Oklahoma needs to get overturned. And they need to go back to, if you're going to be part of this system, then we're all under the same contract. If the SEC signs this, they sign this, it all goes into a pool and it gets distributed just like it does with Major League Baseball Everybody gets the same amount. If you truly care about a level, because I heard this phrase, level playing field a lot. You can't in front of Congress say, we want a level playing field in this regard. At the same time, the commissioner of your league is trying to fight for the ability for his conference and the Big Ten to make more money in the playoff and with TV deals. It's either you want equity from that standpoint or you don't. That's what it boils down to. So my hope is if they go this route, that then gets used to at some point in time, the next fight, which comes to the TV money, that you use this rule and this protections from Congress and these rules from the NCAA to say, listen, we're going back to this. TV revenue is going to be split from everybody. Everybody's going to get this amount. Whatever we negotiate, all the Power Fours, Power Fives, whatever, they're going to make this amount. That's my hope. A couple other things from this. A lot of people are against NIL not being used as an inducement, which I support. There was a lot of talk about protecting players and protecting athletes from bad actors. And I was very curious where they were going to go with this, but there seemed to be a lot of common ground with like the NIL and the collective people with the coaches and the AD. Definitely some things they disagree on, but a lot of it is like they all believe that there needs to be a greater certainty of who can be an agent or not, which I completely agree with. There needs to be certain standardized language, which I think is smart. So this collective can't take 50% of a kid's revenue or get this kind of like there's some of these deals like where they own your rights to anything you do in the NIL sphere for the next 10 years if you're a professional athlete. That's absurd. There needs to be certain standardized language in all NIL contracts. Now that standardized language, as I understand it, and if there's some lawyers in the room or people listen to it, you can understand, you can let me know if I'm wrong here. Standardized has to do with, certain language that protects both sides. You can only take X amount of a kid's revenue beyond that for your fee. You have to have this type of thing. You only own the rights to this. You can only prevent them from that. You can't create these really burdensome rules that they are creating now to say, hey, we own your rights to this, 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 and this, and you can't do this, 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 and this. There needs to be some standard thing for that. That's my understanding of it. It doesn't mean standardized, meaning everyone gets $50,000 for everything that they do. I don't believe it's that. I don't think it's standardized for the amount of money you can make, but more so setting rules for what the language of those contracts can be. If I sign with a collective or I sign with this, you can't demand this from me or get that from me because this is the rules. I support that. One of the things that bothered me is they talked about, that I like. They talked about full disclosure. I think that's smart because you have a lot of people lying about what they're paying players that they're really not. And so, hey, we played so and so $5 million last year, and then you find out they really didn't. There was some of that conversation. The NIL lawyer was very much against the portal, which I thought was good. They didn't get into specifics, but I thought that was good. Another thing is there was a lot of talk about bringing back, the student athlete. And that's the part where I was the most annoyed, especially with Nick Saban and the AD at Alabama. They kept talking about a student athlete. I'm like, listen, buddy, we know what's going on at your school. I don't want to hear you talking about student athlete. So I don't want to hear that student part. I don't want to hear that. But that doesn't mean that what they said wasn't correct. They're not the voices necessarily that should be speaking to that because, and what I mean, they can speak to it. I'm glad they speak to it, but you're not the examples of what that should look like is more of my thing because they are correct in what they're saying. There needs to be protections for these players and these type of things. And the other part too is if there's more standardized agents and standardized language, then there's less of the burdensome things about it. They also talk a lot about education in this space. I just saw somebody in the chat that said something about, you need to be doing things like taking certain classes. That's absolutely correct. They talked a little bit about that in here, about creating education in the sphere as far as education for contracts and taxes and things like that, their liabilities. Because what I understood was right now these guys are viewed as contractors and there's a different tax. And I know this from my employees. There's a different tax obligation for a contractor than there is for a full-time employee. So there's a lot of things. And then one of the things that was being threatened by the AD at Bama, which he's actually right, even, he's right, is if these players become employees or if we continue to go down this path where schools have to pay a certain amount of dollars, then the reality is they're just going to have to stop having certain sports, which they can't do. Well, here's the thing. So you may say, hey, listen, I think one guy said, like, we have 29 sports, we might have to go down to like 6. Because right now, you have to keep certain sports because you have to have, for every male athlete, you have to have a certain number of female athletes, which I'm not against to a degree. So I'm not completely against Title IX. I think there's some things about Title IX that I like. There's some other things that don't make sense, like in like they don't count football the same as other sports, but the reality is you're going to have to cut sports. But because of current Title IX, if I cut, women's soccer because they lost us this much, and this sport, you have to then cut the men's an equivalent number of men's sports as well, and so that's going to create a lot of issues. And so you start taking money away from schools and to pay players, then you have less money to now give to those sports, and now those budgetary things become a problem. Like I think the AD at Alabama, and this is true for a lot of schools, said that they lost something like $40 million on their their outside of football and basketball. The rest of their sports lost $40 million. What they have to pay coaches, travel, uniforms, facilities. Those sports are not driving revenue. They're losing money to travel the women's soccer team, to clothe the women's soccer team, the men's soccer team. True for both. Swimming teams, either side, track, either side. You're losing money on those sports just within themselves. It's the money over here that pays for that. You take the money over here away, we don't have the money to pay that. If you take the money over here and start making us pay the players directly through that, then we're going to have a problem. So that was a very interesting conversation that there's a lot of truth to that not enough people are talking about. So those are just kind of some of my takeaways. I felt good about the fact that it did seem like even on the congressional side, whether you're talking about Ted Cruz, who's a conservative Republican, or you're talking about Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, who's I'm not a hardcore leftist, but he's very far on the left side. There was a lot of common agreement between them on certain things, like not being employees, protecting students, which I thought was good. There was a lot of things about education of players, protection of them, and another thing they talked about is creating a system in which I think it was Richard Blumenthal that talked about this first, but creating a system where beyond your playing career, there's a certain period of time where schools are obligated to make sure they're taking care of players' medical needs. Y'all know I've been about that for a long time. So I was very happy. I do believe it was Richard Blumenthal, who's a Democrat from Connecticut, who came up with that, which I was happy to hear. And there was a lot of agreement about things like that. So there was a lot of things that I felt like this actually felt like a productive conversation. You had people on the right and left kind of saying similar things, like we need to figure out the specifics of this. But the other thing I liked is right and left, you had a thought of, hey, we don't need to be the ones controlling all of this. What do you want from us? What do you need from us? Well, you need these certain protections. We got to do this. We got to pass this. We got to do this. All right, cool. Then you got to create a system to go run it. But then the problem is there has to be some way of overseeing that system. And that's the problem, is how do you create that system? Do you overhaul the NCAA? Do you do away with the NCAA and create a new governing body? Does it become a congressional oversight thing, which I don't think is a good idea? That's going to be tricky to figure out what's the best path forward. And I don't know that I know the answer to that. I know what I think and what I would like. I'd like to see a new governing body that schools kind of buy into, that controls some of these things, and kind of get rid of the NCAA, because I think it's too scarred. I would much rather see the NCAA get overhauled than to see the Congress take it over. I think we can all agree on that. But it didn't seem like there was anybody there that had an appetite for Congress taking this whole thing over. That was a good thing to see. So I thought there was a lot of good coming out of here. I felt really good about. It seems like Congress the people that I listened to understood on both sides that employment is not the way to go, that players deserve a cut of the pie. Totally agree with that. There needs to be protections put in place for players and student athletes, which again, I completely agree with that. So there was at least a lot of common ground that I thought was good. And it was, I'm one of those losers that listens to congressional hearings, and these things are, for the last 4 or 5 years, I stopped listening to them because it's useless. It's just, I'm on this side, so I got to believe this. I'm on this, I got to believe this, and we hate each other, and it's useless. This was a really productive conversation. You're like, this is what it's supposed to be about, and I thought that was good. So if you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to go watch it. There's a lot you're going to get from it. If you're someone who's responding, if you have an opinion on what Saban should or shouldn't say, and you didn't watch the whole thing, don't be that guy. Go watch it. You can have the same opinion, but at least it's an educated opinion. I would encourage you to watch it. Don't go into it. Don't thinking, well, I don't like Republicans. I don't like that guy. I don't like Democrats. Just get all that out. Look at it as a bunch of people trying to solve a problem. And if you look at it from that standpoint, I actually thought it was a really good session. I don't know what's going to come of it. I don't have a lot of faith that anything good's going to come of it just because there's no track record of it. But I'll say this, after watching, and again, I got about 10 minutes left of it. After watching this hearing, I feel a lot better that there's an appetite to fix this in a way that's productive for students and the schools than I did before. And that's a positive. So that was my one big takeaway from it that made me feel good about it. And I'm hoping that it opens up a little bit of a sliver that somebody down the road can go say, well, if we're going to talk about equity here, why are we not talking about equity when it comes to TV money and playoff revenue money? That'll be an interesting thing to see if it comes from that. So we'll see how it plays out. I did have a couple super chats before we get out of here that I wanted to get to. John Lyons says, how come Miami was able to change the game date with team that contracted later than the game with Notre Dame? That has to do, honestly, John, with the number of ACC games they had. And, I mean, Notre Dame understood it. Miami, it just was one of those. It's kind of like when the SEC canceled the Oklahoma-Georgia game. It kind of came down to that type of thing. It's a little bit more complex than that. But I do appreciate the super chat, John, very, very much. But my understanding is essentially Miami had a certain schedule and they'd schedule certain teams. And then they had the Notre Dame requirement with their conference requirement. And it was just, they really wanted to get out of the Notre Dame contract. Notre Dame, my understanding, worked with them on it. So there wasn't like Notre Dame's like, screw you, you got to play us. And Miami said, no, we're not going to play you. I don't believe that was the case. And they scheduled it for a couple years down the road. So it'll get played again. But it's just about making the schedule make sense for everybody involved, is my understanding on that one. Others might know a little bit more about it. Lucky Ducks 512. I meant to get to this earlier and I forgot to. I apologize, Lucky Ducks, but thank you for the super chat. It says, how much more important is quality depth with the expanded playoff, and do you think that we will see more guys rotate earlier in games? It is incredibly important. The reality, though, the challenge is, yes, I want to use more guys, but if there's a big drop off in the first team and the second team, then it's harder to do that in some of the bigger games. I think it's also why you're seeing more teams kind of, this is one of the understandable reasons why you're seeing more and more people go to portal guys, because even that aren't really good players, because I'd rather my backup be a fourth year guy than a freshman, because I need to play him more. I know what this guy can do. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but I understand it. For some teams, you have to do it. So you're playing it for some people to win it. Everyone's going to have to play at least 16 games to win a title. If you win your conference championship and get a bye, you still got to play 16 games. Some teams are going to have to play 17. If you play in a conference title game and win it and don't get a bye, or play in a conference title game and lose it, then you're not getting a bye. You've got to win 4 games. So you have 12 regular season conference title game, and then you got to win 4 to win 17 games. Depth is going to be crucial, Lucky Ducks. You're spot on that. And the only way to do, because there's only like a couple 2 to 3 weeks off between the end of your season. And if you're playing in a conference championship game that first weekend of December, the playoffs will start like the 19th. So you're getting 2 weeks off. That's it. Notre Dame gets a bit more of a breather, but those teams don't. And so, the teams that don't get a bye, man, that's tough. And you got to plan that, hey, what if we don't have a bye? You got to plan for that. I think it's going to force teams to play more depth. And that's where more coaches that are more sub-package and things, it matters. And some positions, it's harder to do that. Quarterback, you don't necessarily need to rotate a quarterback. But what about O-line? Is it maybe smarter to do that? Do you see coaches? And here's another one. Does it change the reps, not just the reps in games, but do coaches alter the reps in practice? Some coaches are 70-30, some are 60-40. Do you get to the point where, like, by week 5, we're more 50-50, 60-40 if you were 70-30? Do you do 70-30 on Tuesday, but then maybe 60-40 on Wednesday and then 50-50 on Thursday? So the smart coaches are not only going to have to look at how they're using their depth in a game, but then how do you impact that when you talk about your practice and the reps you're distributing in practice. So, or it could be, hey, we're going to stay 70-30 with our first team versus second team reps, but we're going to do more rotating within that 70 of so our number 2 is going to get some of those reps with the ones. And then my number 3 is going to then get some reps with the number 2s. There's a lot of things that are going to factor into that you have to consider when you talk about the fact these teams are going to have to play 16 and 17 games. I mean, think about how many teams were just decimated with injuries going into a bowl game. Imagine what that's like if, hey, we're going to this game. If we win it, we got 3 more maybe to play, 2 more maybe to play. You got to really be smart about how you build your roster and how you manage that roster. It's going to be very, very important. Very, very important. And then last question from Michael S. Tony Alford to Michigan. Your thoughts? I'm happy for him. I know Coach wasn't loving this current situation. I'll just leave it at that. And I'm not surprised that he got another job. And I think Michigan, is a good place. Good place for him to go. Running backs that I know he recruited some of the kids that are there. He's a Midwestern guy, blue collar guy, great family. I have a ton of love for Coach Alford. And so this is a great hire by Sharon Moore. You're getting a guy that loves people, loves his players. I mean, I know this for a fact. Tony Alford is still close today with players he recruited at Notre Dame that picked other schools. But because they developed such a great relationship, they stayed close. Parents, same way. He loves young people. He understands the importance of the mission of being a coach, which is to develop young men, not just as football players, but as people. I have a ton of respect for Tony Alford, and I'm happy for him. And this is a good move for him and a great hire by Sharon Moore to get him. So they got 2 dogs that were on the recruiting trail now on offense with him and Ron Bellamy. So something to definitely keep in mind. But a great amount of respect for Tony Alford. Great hire by Sharon Moore. And, it's a loss for Ohio State. I don't know that Ryan Day will think it's a loss because he's Ryan Day, but this is a loss. We'll see who they replace him with. But it won't be Dylan McCullough because you're going to hear his name mentioned because he's Dylan McCullough and he's a great coach. But the fact is, you're also going to he's not going to leave for a lateral move. But it's a big hire. And if you're a running backs coach, Ohio State's a pretty good place to be from a stable standpoint, but also working with Chip Kelly because he puts a lot on the running backs. But we'll kind of see what he does. But I think he's a heck of a coach, and I'm happy for him. If I'd be super pissed if I was an Ohio State fan, and I understand that, but I'm not a fan of Ohio State or Michigan. I'm a fan of Tony Alford, and I think he's a great man, and I'm happy for him. Very happy for him. Shaquille Oatmeal with the last one. Way OT question for Brian's beard. What product do you recommend for Shaq's beard? Also, who was the most epic beard you've ever seen? Great show today. Man, I don't know that I've ever really paid attention to anyone else's beard, to be completely honest with you. I don't use any product on mine. I barely even shave it. I just kind of go like to here. I don't spend a whole lot of time grooming. That's not really my deal. But I'm sorry I can't be more helpful there. I do appreciate your super chat, but I don't really recommend. I can't recommend anything because I don't use anything. I just use clippers and just trim it. And I don't trim the beard; it grows out. I'm about a week away from just shaving it off, and I let it grow back out again. That's how I trim my beard. So just to let you guys know, that's kind of what I do. I've never been I've had this haircut right here for most of my adult life. I think the first time I got it I was 16. Every now and then I'll let it grow out, but I just don't like to deal with it. So just not a way I want to spend my time. But I do appreciate the super chat very, very much. Well, everybody, that's going to do it for today's show. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I had fun talking about the stuff I talked about today. I hope you all enjoyed the stuff that I talked about today. Hit that like button if you did. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Hit the notification bell if you haven't already done so. Share this podcast, not just physically, but tell people about it that are Notre Dame fans. They got to like it. I don't like Driscoll, so what? Watch. You'll at least be challenged in some way, and you'll learn something about it. You don't have to like me to listen. That's the thing. But you're going to learn something. If you have an open mind, I think you're going to learn something, and you'll at least engage in good conversation with some really good people. If you don't like me, the people in the chat, great people, great conversation. I love the group of people we have here. It's very, very excellent. And so definitely do that. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you have not done it, I promise you are missing out. It is a great place to be. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. You get discounts at the merch store when you sign up. We have, if you aren't a message board person, but you want to support IB, still do it. There's no requirement you have to be on the board. If you want to support us above and beyond, we have 2 options. You can sign up for one of the booster clubs, either gold, shamrock, or blue. You get some free merch from IB if you sign up for one of those. And then we also, on our IB store page, have an IB donation of minimum $25, but you can go beyond if you want to support us some more. You'll find that at the bottom of all the items. If you go to the store, go below all the hats and shirts, and you can see all that stuff there as well. So I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, how can I support you above and beyond? How can I support you, but I don't want to do super chats? Those are all ways that you can do it. Is message board, buy the merch gear, which we don't make a ton off that, but also the booster clubs and then the donation page are all ways that you can do that. So anyway, thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Had a blast. My dogs were pretty good for the most part, right? A couple little breakups there, but otherwise they were pretty awesome. They're both passed out now, of course. But anyway, thanks for being with us, everybody. Appreciate y'all. Have a great day. I'll talk to you again very, very soon. Tomorrow, in fact, on the Irish Breakdown podcast.